Hell knows what, his mother said, in the first grade to start jamming kids with twos. It can forever discourage learning. I'll talk to that teacher. And the fifth D, can you tell me more about that? You're a good reader. We had poetry. John took another step back, and then the lights went out all night last night. I had to wait for it to come back on, so I fell asleep. I did math and English, but not poetry. Mother went to school. She had a very emotional conversation with the teacher. Naomi dragged her mother to the principal's office, and there she tearfully began to say that she would quit immediately if she was prevented from educating her students in her own way. And she was young, but she was already famous. She had won some competitions. She had her own programs, or maybe there was no one to take her place. Either way, the director valued her. Naomi will not wish bad things to your child, the principal said to the mother, and with a sigh added, and if you do not like it here, move the child to another school. But that was a hassle, and the main thing was that the other school was far away, and John would really have to be taken there and picked up, so the mother let it all go. But the worst thing about the school wasn't Naomi, it was the kids. They mostly came from the same kindergarten, or at least played together in the yard, and John was an outsider. At first, they just ignored him, shunned him. Then they realized he couldn't fight back, so they started bullying him openly. Now it was even a matter of honor for his classmates to pick on him, throwing textbooks from the desk, pulling his jacket so that the buttons came off, taking away food in the dining hall, locking him in the toilet stall. The guys had the pleasure of inventing more and more bullying. John, on the other hand, raised by his stepfather, never complained. Maybe if he had been beaten here too, his mother would have eventually taken him out of this school. But he wasn't beaten, just bullied. Once he got mobbed in the bathroom and had the zipper of his pants ripped to shreds. And when he was waddling down the school corridor holding his pants, someone snuck up behind him and yanked them so that they slid down to his knees. Everyone was laughing, especially the girls, laughing loudly, pointing fingers. Maybe if Naomi had been the only one to know about it, it would have been hushed up. But the principal was walking down the hall. Jonah's assailants scurried away like mice, but the principal remembered them. The same day he called them into his office with their parents and had a debriefing. He brought some of them to tears. But who would respect a boy who had his pants pulled down in front of the whole school? And John became an even bigger pariah. He was now simply avoided, but if there were no adults around, they told him something nasty, what a weakling, a nerd, and in general, he was shunned by everyone. And at home now my stepfather demanded a diary and pulled out his belt. He bought himself a new one, with a big heavy metal buckle that left bruises that didn't go away for a long time. But when the boys changed at school for gym class, John was chased out of the gym locker room and he changed in the bathroom where no one could see his bruises. The worst was in the last grade of elementary school. The classmates got stronger, the bullying got more sophisticated. Then one day, Aunt Lucy saw the unprecedented sight of John curled up in the stairwell, sobbing. He broke down. He had to get up to go into the apartment where his stepfather was waiting for him. But he couldn't do it. It seemed to him the whole world was hitting him, and there wasn't even a tiny corner left where he would feel safe. John couldn't remember if there had ever been a time when he'd been loved in his own family. Maybe when his mother hadn't divorced his father yet. But when he turned 3, his father had already left for the ends of the earth with his new love, and his mother had a new husband. Humiliated by her husband's infidelity, she hurried to prove to herself and to the whole world, it is worth it to dissolve the marriage, as she will not be alone for a single day. The mother was not a very good-looking woman, but they say of such women, she has something in her. Tall, thin like a model, very beautiful haircut. She always got her hair cut by the best hairdresser in town. Big dark eyes. A little bit of her mother reminded him of a young Jacqueline Kennedy. John thought about it when he became an adult and accidentally saw a photo of the widow of the American president. Photos of his father at home did not remain. Exactly, mother wanted to break with the past, absolutely all ties. And the stepfather was a man completely invisible, as my grandmother would say. Soapy. When he married my mother, he was about 50 years old and had no children of his own. It would seem, be happy that you got a son. It remains to be seen whether a common child will be born. But stepfather John immediately hated. At the same time, he was smart enough not to tell his mother about it. If the stepfather openly stated his feelings and demanded that the child anywhere to give grandparents or in a boarding school, the mother would have nothing left but to part with him. But the stepfather said that the stepson has a difficult character. This is a 3-year-old, and if he is not put on the right path, the family will be bad. After a few months, John feared his stepfather like fire. They had a dog, an old mutt who liked to sleep in the closet. She would sneak in there, snuggle up in the dark, and fall asleep in a pile of stuff. John began to follow suit. His stepfather came home from work before his mother. He wouldn't let her stepson go to kindergarten. The boy would be totally spoiled there. So John hung around the empty house all day. He didn't know how to tell time yet, but he knew that when both hands of the clock slid down, it was time to hurry to his hiding place. He would lurk there, having learned to bolt the closet from the inside and wait until his mother returned from work. His stepfather, on the other hand, never looked for him. When he arrived, he threw off his heavy shoes with pleasure. He stomped into the kitchen, pulling out what his mother had prepared that morning. John knew the food was primarily for him, but he tried to take as little as possible. The most important thing for him was to keep his stepfather fed and satisfied. The man always brought a drink from work. Not vodka, not my God. My stepfather insistently emphasized that strong alcohol he does not take in his mouth never goes down to white, but beer was his specialty. And by the time his mother came back, he had time to get pretty drunk. Canned stepfather threw in the garbage chute, and the mother had to believe that no one drank here, and the man is sober as a glass. It was the kind of game, John realized, that they played every night. At first, when the boy was still in hiding, he would witness these drinking parties, and his stepfather would beat him, not sparingly, not in proportion to his strength beat him to keep him quiet and not to talk. It could well have been a disaster once the stepfather threw the kid so that he hit his temple on the corner of the nightstand. But John was lucky. He was never seriously injured, and the stepfather threatened, "If the boy tells about the beatings of his mother, the next day you will kill him." And John kept quiet. He even persuaded his mother to let him bathe by himself, so she wouldn't accidentally see his bruises and bruises on his body. He realized now that this was just another dirty family game. His mother knew what was going on, couldn't help but notice John's stricken look, but pretended that all was well in the family. There was another complication in all this. The boy was born handsome. That is, not just a cute kid, but one who could be in a movie or on the cover of a magazine. Black hair like his mother's or his father's, and very light, almost white eyes with a lid. Clearly defined perfect facial features and a fine build. Those who saw the boy for the first time predicted a career as an artist or modeling star. Those who knew John better stopped noticing him. The boy became more and more afraid of people, having no friends. Because he was almost never let out on the street, he knew no one but his own family. So he didn't trust people, shutting up, not answering questions, and trying to slip out of the room. John knew that his mother, despite everything, still loved him. When he had once fallen seriously ill, she had seen his genuine concern. When she was in the hospital with him, she was no different from other mothers, and she carried him in her arms when he, small, suffering, could not sleep. And she read books to him and told him about her childhood, so that he, who before did not even smile, laughed now as a normal child. But when there was a stepfather, the mother changed, became restrained and cold. Maybe the stepfather beat her too. John had never seen this, but what the saint should have done to her if she did not dare to stroke her son on the head. The only person besides his mother that John had a shadow of trust in was the old neighbor. They ran into each other by chance, usually on the landing, and Aunt Lucy always spoke to the boy affectionately. She saw how withdrawn and fidgety he was, but it did not repel her in the least. She had seen too much in her life. Often she would slip John something tasty, a homemade pie, his mother never baked them, a big brown apple, or a chocolate bar. John knew that the neighbor understood everything that was going on in their family, because he had once said, "Nothing, you will go to school, there it will be easier for you." And since then, the boy dreamed of the time when he could get out of the house. John already perceived his apartment as a fortress in which he was imprisoned. Kindergarten. Okay, it's voluntary. But his mother couldn't keep him out of school, even if his stepfather was against it, and it'll be just like it was at the hospital. Kids and adults who don't fight. If he knew how wrong he was. But then, when his mother started picking him up, like the other first graders, he felt like he was in seventh heaven. His mother went with him to the store and the market, bought different things. He had never had so many things. A suit and a sports suit, shirts, t-shirts, a backpack, notebooks. You could list the riches that now belonged to John. Also, his mother, without asking his stepfather about it, had given John a room. Before, he had slept on the couch in the living room. But now his mother said, "You're not going to live here. He likes to watch TV, and you have to study." John didn't believe it, but his mother told him to take the smallest room, which used to be his father's study. His desk and bookshelves still stood there. Now they housed his son's textbooks. John was scared. He knew his stepfather liked to nap here on the couch when he had a drink. Let the smell of booze stay in the room, and he wouldn't bring it into the bedroom. John suspected he'd get it, but first his stepfather voiced his displeasure to his mother. In his opinion, the boy should be in front of the eyes all the time, and nothing to create in royal conditions. Now at school, will appear his friends' buddies. Who knows who he will take to his house and what they will do behind closed doors. Then his stepfather tried to rough John up a few more times. He came with a bottle, told his stepson, "Get out," and habitually settled down to rest on his favorite couch. But his mother proved once again that she saw and understood everything. John did not know what she said to her husband, but a lock was put on the door of the room, and John was given the key for his own use. He walked to school like a groom to a wedding. He held his mother's hand and held the bouquet to his chest, but his mother didn't stand in the crowd of other parents while the ceremony was going on. She was in a hurry to get to work, so she found her son's class, pushed him over to the other kids, said, "Get settled in here," and left. John watched the whole thing unfold with his mouth hanging open. At that time, he had not yet read the book about Mowgli, but everything around him amazed him. Dressed up children, a sea of flowers, music, balloons. Everyone was saying such kind, affectionate words to them, the first graders. Then they were taken to the classroom and Naomi, the young teacher, seated them all in their desks. The parents continued to crowd in the doorway, and as soon as the teacher let them go home, they sorted them out. Naomi had to walk John home. "Tell your mother that I won't do it every day." Hell knows what, his mother said, in the first grade to start jamming kids with twos. It can forever discourage learning. I'll talk to that teacher. And the fifth D, can you tell me more about that? You're a good reader. We had poetry. John took another step back, and then the lights went out all night last night. I had to wait for it to come back on, so I fell asleep. I did math and English, but not poetry. Mother went to school. She had a very emotional conversation with the teacher. Naomi dragged her mother to the principal's office, and there she tearfully began to say that she would quit immediately if she was prevented from educating her students in her own way. And she was young, but she was already famous. She had won some competitions, she had her own programs, or maybe there was no one to take her place. Either way, the director valued her. Naomi will not wish bad things to your child, the principal said to the mother, and with a sigh added, "And if you do not like it here, move the child to another school." But that was a hassle, and the main thing was that the other school was far away, and John would really have to be taken there and picked up, so the mother let it all go. But the worst thing about the school wasn't Naomi, it was the kids. They mostly came from the same kindergarten, or at least played together in the yard, and John was an outsider. At first, they just ignored him, shunned him. Then they realized he couldn't fight back, so they started bullying him openly. Now it was even a matter of honor for his classmates to pick on him. Throwing textbooks from the desk, pulling his jacket so that the buttons came off, taking away food in the dining hall, locking him in the toilet stall. The guys had the pleasure of inventing more and more bullying. John, on the other hand, raised by his stepfather, never complained. Maybe if he had been beaten here too, his mother would have eventually taken him out of this school. But he wasn't beaten, just bullied. Once he got mobbed in the bathroom and had the zipper of his pants ripped to shreds. And when he was waddling down the school corridor, holding his pants, someone snuck up behind him and yanked them so that they slid down to his knees. Everyone was laughing, especially the girls, laughing loudly, pointing fingers. Maybe if Naomi had been the only one to know about it, it would have been hushed up. But the principal was walking down the hall. Jonah's assailants scurried away like mice, but the principal remembered them. The same day he called them into his office with their parents and had a debriefing. He brought some of them to tears. But who would respect a boy who had his pants pulled down in front of the whole school? And John became an even bigger pariah. He was now simply avoided, but if there were no adults around, they told him something nasty. What a weakling, a nerd, and in general, he was shunned by everyone. And at home now, my stepfather demanded a diary and pulled out his belt. He bought himself a new one, with a big heavy metal buckle that left bruises that didn't go away for a long time. But when the boys changed at school for gym class, John was chased out of the gym locker room, and he changed in the bathroom where no one could see his bruises. The worst was in the last grade of elementary school. The classmates got stronger, the bullying got more sophisticated. Then one day, Aunt Lucy saw the unprecedented sight of John curled up in the stairwell sobbing. He broke down. He had to get up to go into the apartment where his stepfather was waiting for him, but he couldn't do it. It seemed to him the whole world was hitting him, and there wasn't even a tiny corner left where he would feel safe. Techniques. Parents of the children who poisoned John were also scared and tried their best to keep their children in line. God forbid you will have to bring you to justice if the boy does something to himself, the lawyer told them. In short, the father took John away with him, shrunken and frightened of the coming changes in his life. Aunt Lucy hugged the boy and promised him that everything in his life would be fine. Jacob did not take his son in. He was always traveling, living the life of a busy businessman. He was not going to marry again, and his household was run by servants. The father followed the advice of an old teacher and placed his son in a very good and expensive closed school. There he immediately made it clear that the boy requires classes with a psychologist, a long rehabilitation, but he really hopes that eventually the guy will fit into the team. Gradually, amazing changes began to happen to John. It came to him that here in this school, no one will not say a rude word to him. He is a rich hair, his father is the coolest. And the one who would see the young man in a few years would never believe that before he was a quiet, battered boy who was afraid to say a word. John became tough, sharp-tongued, no longer afraid of anything and everything. Now no one was an authority for him. On the contrary, now he was feared by children and teachers. It would seem that John should have understood better than anyone how hard it is to live when you are poisoned and never allowed this to happen to others. But on the contrary, he liked to humiliate his peers and younger kids. He enjoyed ridiculing teachers in public. They tried talking to him to no avail. At school, Say had to be found. Secondly, Emma was an excellent swimmer. In the third place, as the expertise found out, the girl had drowned recently, so the rest of the time she was somewhere. But where? It was impossible to get lost in the school district. At any point in the forest, you could hear the noise of cars and figure out where to go to get to the highway. But most importantly, Emma's wrists were bound, which meant someone had been holding her by force all this time. The mystery was never solved. Neither the girl nor her parents had any enemies. No one blackmailed them or extorted money. In short, no motive, no perpetrator. When the guys were questioned, they could say that the only person with whom Emma did not develop a relationship was John. But how many young people tease each other? Besides, the kid never dropped out of school, always on the radar. And yet I feel uncomfortable for some reason when I look at him, admitted the school principal to colleagues. Yes, he is very handsome. From him can long not take your eyes off as a work of art. And at the same time, here we have all repeatedly talked about the fact that John could play in the movie, would be the idol of millions of girls. But who could he play? I was thinking about it for the first time recently. And you know what came to mind? Vampires, werewolves, sons of the devil, that sort of thing. Bingo, agreed the chemistry teacher. I'm always a little sad when we graduate. It's a shame to let go of kids who've worked so hard. But here I just can't wait for this young man to leave the walls of our institution. There's something about him that gives me the creeps. What do you think, Nellie? You know him best, don't you? Nellie was the school counselor. She was the one who worked the hardest with little Hero when he was brought to school. Well, what can I tell you, girls? Her voice was sad. You remember what he was like. When a child like that comes to school, you always want to cheer him up, give him more warmth than others. Pity, kindness, and love can sometimes work wonders, but not in this case. I had hoped that John would gradually catch up with his peers, become an open-minded boy who believes that not all people are evil and that many people treat him well. But he did. Yes, he caught up with his peers, and in some respects he far exceeded them. When I conducted certain tests with him, sometimes I could not believe my eyes. They showed hidden cruelty, aggression, and to a very high degree. It seemed that the tests were wrong the first time. It's not about John. Anyone could hurt him, and he'd be afraid to raise his hand to a fly. But what he was hiding in his soul was accumulating all these years, and it seems that now it has finally formed. I confess, I'm afraid of that boy myself. He's always very nice to you, the chemist said, but it says poor people who get it from him. And as for you, he probably remembers how much you fiddled with him. Not that I'm afraid, the psychologist corrected herself, but if I didn't know him, I wouldn't want to meet him somewhere in the woods or some other deserted place. Even if he just walked toward me and looked me in the eye. You were kidding about the vampires and werewolves, but there's a joke in every joke, as the saying goes. I don't care for jokes, the principal said grimly, after our Emma's death. Such a golden girl, she was going to the university. The teachers were silent, but each was thinking of one thing. It had been proved that John had not left the school all those days. Why was it his hard grin that came to mind when they remembered Emma's death? Wanted to hide quietly in the house, locked themselves behind all the locks, and it was unknown whether it would help. When 2 or 3 of them appeared in the village store, it was empty, and the clerk's hands began to tremble. The men always bought the same things: a lot of bread, meat, alcohol, and cigarettes, sugar, coffee. I don't know if it's a bulk buy or a robbery, said Cindy, the clerk. I'd give them anything to get them out of my store. The only people who saw the castle were those who went far into the woods: mushroom pickers, fishermen going to a distant lake, or hunters. But in time they began to avoid this place, because as soon as they approached it, as if from under the ground grew a black-bearded guardian. What do you want here? Go away. Did you buy this forest or what? Rumbled another hapless mushroom picker, but hurried away. Everyone realized that it was better not to cross these people. The locals were expecting trouble. They sensed it, as they knew, even before any forecasters, whether this year's winter would be frosty and summer would be dry. True, they thought that the newcomers would set fire to something or fight with someone or, God forbid, something worse would happen. And no one paid attention when in the nearest town to them, the one where people always went for shopping, for entertainment, for doctor's appointments if necessary, people started disappearing there more often than usual. Before, children disappeared, and luckily, in most cases, were found afterwards. They simply got lost, or forgot to say they were going to a friend's house, and their parents immediately sounded the alarm. Another category of lost people were old people with memory problems. They would leave home and forget where they were going and how to get back. But now young people are going missing. Teenagers, girls, only once the wave reached the village. The police came, brought a card, asked questions. The girl Cecilia left the house towards evening. She told her mother that she was going out for a walk and to buy some bread. When she didn't come back in 2 hours, her mother started looking for her. The next day, volunteers were looking for Lilia. They're still looking for her. A pretty girl, red-haired with small features. She taught piano at the college. No one in the village could remember having seen such a girl, and they didn't bother the people with inquiries. And, of course, no one connected Cecilia's disappearance with the castle in the woods, which, if not for the periodic visits of its guards to the store, would have been forgotten by now. John didn't know if he'd done the right thing by secluding himself from the world. On the one hand, he liked the house to the point of madness. It had everything his master wanted: the monolithic stone walls that gave him a sense of security, and all the furnishings inside, the black-colored designer furniture, the strange surrealist paintings, the subdued lighting, and the silence all around. Those who surrounded John, whether servants or guards, knew that the master could not tolerate chatter, that music, especially loud and rhythmic music, infuriated him. So the guards spoke as little as possible in his presence, nodding their heads to indicate that they understood the order. The silence was healing for John. There were times when he spent days half lying by the window in a rocking chair, and there were no sounds except the birdsong outside the window. On the other hand, John himself realized that this was not normal, that even the life he had led before, with night racing through deserted streets, with drinking, with buddies he didn't remember the next morning, was more natural than his present reclusiveness. But he was sick, and he realized it himself. He'd have felt his illness when his father was alive, and John had wanted to go into the den he needed to. But his father wouldn't let him do that. He would make John work. He would have to support himself. He would have to look after him, and that was unbearable. When John was left alone, it was as if his mind had given him the go-ahead, and he immediately set about realizing his plan to go somewhere where no one could get him. John knew that wherever he was, from time to time he would be overcome with rage and longing, so intense that it took his breath away. He remembered the humiliation of his childhood, as if he were reliving the strokes of his belt, the bullying of his classmates, the years not just cut out of his life, but spent in hell. And then he wanted to howl, because he could not take revenge at that time, but had to humble himself to accept all offenses without complaint. And John knew that only one thing could dampen that feeling of sizzling rage: other people's pain. It was like a powerful drug, even if it only worked for a short time. Maybe he should have gotten real treatment, but he knew, after all he'd done, no one would ban him from a mental institution. Prison awaited him, which he couldn't stand, because he would be humiliated there too. So it was necessary to reconcile all this somehow, to sacrifice again and again to the god of rage that lived in his soul, and then to hide all the consequences. And his helpers were men who knew no fear, no compassion, and no shame. And John paid generously for their services. He himself appeared in public very rarely, maybe a few times a year, on those days when he felt like his old self, a healthy, calm young man. And then he would go by car to the city. He could sit in some restaurant, or make a reservation in advance, or fall in with some of his old friends, or even go into the old madness with nightclubs. However, he was always accompanied by one of the black-bearded guards. A bodyguard, he explained briefly, if any of his friends wondered who it was. "Brr," one of his friends responded, "I wouldn't want to entrust my life to a man like that. He looks like he could stab you in the middle of the road. Look in his eyes, he's not a man, he's a wolf." Wolf loyalty is legendary. John grinned and changed the subject. Sometimes, though, he would slow down and point to a girl who was passing by. "That one," he'd say. The girl would be followed, and the hour would come when John would get his hands on her. And then the day came when black-bearded Sam showed up in the room where John was smoking alone, enjoying the scarlet sunset burning outside the window. "Gotta be careful, master," he said. Sam had spoken countless times in front of John, so he didn't ignore the words, raising his eyebrows. "What's the matter? Pretend you're like everyone else. Stop. At least for a little while. They've started looking too close around us." "Who?" Names John didn't remember, the black one, but they won't find her. "They won't, yeah," Sam nodded. "They found her car. On the road to your house." "What was that fool doing there? And why didn't anyone think to move the car?" "She just got lost, yeah." And Stan got excited. "Yeah. A beautiful girl came into her own. He knew you'd be glad. He just forgot about her car. Unforgivable oversight." "Unforgivable, yeah. He won't go hunting again. But I beg you, master, lay low for a while." "We'll see," John said grudgingly. And that's when, just then, Catherine came into his life. Catherine never thought that she would become a mother of many children. No, she imagined her life very beautiful, like a princess. Such dreams appeared at her just since her mother gave her an airy princess dress. Catherine was brought up by one mother. The woman was kind, with a good character, but ugly as a mortal sin. Crooked teeth protruded forward like Baba Yaga, and many children, seeing her for the first time, began to cry. Catherine's mother was a social worker. She took care of old people, carried them groceries from the store, took coupons to doctors, and cleaned apartments. The salary was penniless, and Aunt Maria was tired to the point that by evening she could not stand on her feet. But she always had time to carve out a minute and run home, to see how her own daughter was doing, to feed her hot food, and make sure she sat down to study. Free time, even just a few minutes, was the only thing Aunt Maria ever wanted. As for money, she was never once tempted to take a penny from her elders. As a result, they trusted her more than they trusted themselves, and more than one grandmother told her where she had the funeral money in her closet, so that in case of emergency Aunt Maria could dispose of it as intended. And although the small family lived hard and very modestly, yet by New Year's Eve on a lush airy dress for Catherine mother saved up, and the girl shown in the garden is not worse than other girls. And then Catherine, very fond of fairy tales, invented a story to herself that she is actually a princess, which in infancy lost her parents. But when the time comes, and she will have everything, and the palace and untold wealth, and of course the prince. Everything that Catherine dreamed of, falling asleep, was so beautiful that in reality she would have difficulty describing it in words. The palace, of course, as in Disney movies, white pink, puffy clouds around, in short, paradise on earth. And in life from Catherine turned out to be a very weak student who could hardly reach even to 3. "You have a memory like a fish, 3 seconds, with irritation," said the teacher. "All that I explained in the last lesson, you're out of your head." The guys laughed, and Catherine Nicola in front of his eyes. and by the end of elementary school did not believe that it will turn out of her something good. After ninth grade, she left, although her mother urged her to prolong her childhood and finish 11 years in the city's only state, and Catherine left, took the documents from the college, although she knew that very upset her mother. Then her mother, through her own channels, got her a job. Catherine began to babysit other people's children. In this capacity, she was in demand. She did not refuse the most difficult kids, and to the duties of their duties treated faithfully, and took for services inexpensive. She could be hired to escort the child to school and meet him. Catherine was ready to sit with the kids, while the parents were away at the movies or in the theater. But of course, most of all, she appreciated the constant work. If she was invited to a boy or a girl, and it was necessary to come in the morning and leave in the evening. And so day after day, month after month. This is no longer a part-time job, but a salary you can count on something. Plan your spending. Therefore, Catherine was very happy when she was invited to a young, wealthy family. The child here was only one, a 4-year-old boy nanny, pretty and curly as an angel. His mother had been away for a few days for a few hours. Catherine did not know that the woman was then looking at the footage from the video cameras. The girl behaved with the child as usual with children. She read books to nanny, drew with him, went for walks, fed him. The only liberty she allowed herself, if the boy did not finish a banana or peach, she did not throw the rest of the fruit in the trash, but ate it herself. After all, it was a luxury for her. "I am satisfied with this nanny," said the woman to her husband. "Let her work for us at least until her son goes to school." She did not yet know that her husband would decide to have an affair with Catherine. In principle, nothing original. To make a mistress out of his servants, old as the world. At first, Catherine agreed because she was afraid of losing her job, wanted to please the master, and then became attached to him, and was already agreed to such a double life. She was afraid that sooner or later the landlady would find out, and then she would kick her out. And the husband, of course, will not want to quarrel with his wife and leave her, Catherine. But everything turned out differently. Catherine got pregnant. Her lover Carlos turned out to be in a sense a decent man, did not offer her to get rid of the child, and did not throw her out on the street. He rented an apartment for Catherine and said that if everything turned out this way, he would provide for her. In such a situation, women would be divided into two categories. They would be happy to receive such an offer, the others would not have enough. Catherine was not enough, but she pretended to be happy. The contrasts were eating away at her soul. When she checked in at the women's clinic, she said she was single and would raise the child on her own. Then Carlos came and for hours pretended that they had a happy family. He loved Catherine and took care of her. Finally, his wife would call him and ask where he was. Carlos would raise his finger as a sign that Catherine was not to make a sound and lie that he was late at work. His wife would dictate what to buy on the way home. Carlos nodded, and Catherine wanted to shout loudly so that her wife would hear that she and her husband had just gotten out of bed. And let there would be a tram rampage with shouting, cursing, and divorce. Because Carlos is in a good place. There, a rich house, friends, lavish parties, a wife and son. Here, mistress, a fresh stream, so to speak, always smiling, satisfied with everything, loved without question. Catherine wondered whether Carlos even sometimes guesses that she lives with her teeth clenched, shows Hollywood smile, tenderness, love, and admiration, just so that he realized she is better than his wife. With her, he will be happier. Catherine hoped, when the baby is born, Carlos will be attached to him and draw conclusions. Let him leave his wife half of the fortune and divorce. They and the rest is enough. And to keep the ex-wife from making intrigues, you can move somewhere else. For example, to the sea, which she still has not seen. Finally, Mark was born and Catherine held her breath. But if anything had changed, it was for the worse. The baby cried day and night. Catherine walked exhausted. Now she no longer met Carlos at the set table. Yes, and on bed pleasures, frankly, there was no strength or desire. Her friend began to visit her less and less often. No, he faithfully transferred her money for maintenance, was affectionate with her son, but only dropped by just for half an hour, justifying the lack of time. "Have you fallen out of love with me?" he asked him directly. He was silent for a few seconds and said, "You yourself understand everything, kid." He didn't even call her by her name, which was particularly offensive. It felt like a habit. A faceless baby, so as not to get confused by his girlfriend's names, and not to offend any by calling her otherwise. Again, if Catherine had a head on her shoulders, she would not have trudged through life, but stopped and thought, how to be? It was clear that she had to go on alone, and it was necessary to prepare for this path. Maybe she should go to school after all. She could ask her friend for a place to live, ask him to help her with a job, and in return give him freedom and silence. Catherine had to convince Carlos that his wife would not find out anything from her. Instead, the young woman contrived to get pregnant again, decided to take her rival by the number of children. Even her own mother, Aunt Maria, said it was foolish. Nothing scares a man away like small children, she said. You realize that there, in that family, there's a rich kid growing up, as they used to say, a barchin. His father never had any trouble with him. The maid would feed him, change his wet pants and bring him to daddy for a kiss. That's it. What do you have to offer? Exhausted, totally dependent on your Carlos. Only responsibility for you and the kids, hitting reproaches, endless troubles, baby crying. Believe me, he is already tired of you and is looking for an opportunity to be free. So give him that freedom. It's the most desirable thing for him right now. I don't believe you, screamed Catherine and cried angry tears. She was really hysterical. Finally, her mother took pity on her, sat next to her and began to stroke her head. Catherine realized that her mother was right, that Carlos, if he wanted, would have long ago made an offer. It is necessary to pull herself together and think everything through. Going back to her mother's apartment, crammed in there all together, it's not an option. Carlos has to help, and if she agrees to disappear from his life, they'll probably do it. Maybe even take out a mortgage. Carlos would help with the down payment, would slowly give money, but the hope for a personal life was crumbling. Who needs her with 2 children? Catherine hoped that she would force herself to act, but she herself ungodly procrastinated, hoping for something, for some kind of avos, that everything will be resolved by some miracle in her favor. And they did. Carlos' wife found out. There were some kind people who saw him going to Catherine's, and although they never appeared on the street together, Carlos, Catherine, and the children, it was not difficult to conclude whose sons they are. Catherine froze, heard in the two the voice of his former mistress. I talked to my husband, said that, and put you on notice that all relations with you. He immediately breaks off. We have a prenup, and he doesn't want to go penniless in that hen house you've set up for him. So you bought his love. Catherine could not stand it. Yes, my dear, the woman's voice so and text venom. He knows that for that way of life, which we with him so much love and appreciate, have to pay. You two would like to grab a piece of the pie, but you jump like a dog around our table and saw that it doesn't work. But attempts to steal someone else's pie don't just go away. They have to be punished. Your punishment will be the following. You simply disappear with your offspring from our lives, and we forget about your existence. And alimony? Catherine shrieked, I can go to court to prove paternity is now nothing worth. If she wanted to put the former mistress in place, she did not succeed. Do not advise, said that, and Catherine could almost see the woman smiling. You do not want anything to happen to you and your children, right? And it could happen very easily. Some kind of car accident, an accidental hit and run. But Catherine is speechless. They're your husband's children. How can you do that? They're his sons, you can't hurt them. They are your sons, the woman said and cut the conversation short. Catherine tried to come to her senses and failed. She was covered with depression. And if before she was babysitting other people's children, now there was no strength to take care of her own. Repression, promised by his wife, began immediately. They had to move out of the rented apartment. Now they were all staying with Aunt Maria. Grandmother fiddled with her grandchildren, and Catherine, emaciated, blushing, dressed in a tattered robe, staggered from room to kitchen, smoked one cigarette after another, and said that she was disgusted by everything. And this miserable housing and complete hopelessness ahead, and even her own children she does not want to see. Go for a walk then, finally. Aunt Maria snapped at me. Do you think it's easier for me? I'm sorry, at 60 the strength is not the same. But I have a sense of duty, and I know that the children must be fed. So I'm standing here, boiling their porridge. I can't bear to look at your sad face. Go, let at least a breeze blow on you. Maybe you'll come back in a different mood. Catherine obeyed her advice simply because she wanted to be alone for a while, not to listen to anyone's voices. It is known that there is no greater loneliness than being alone in a crowd. There was a park not far from their house. That's where she went. Recently, the park had been renovated. Beautifully tiled alleys, a fountain, planted with toy trees. In the evenings, the lanterns burned here under the olden days. Catherine sat down on one of the benches near the fountain, arranged herself so that only the sound of water could reach her. She closed her eyes and put her face to the sun. Maybe that's why she missed the moment he materialized beside her. She felt his gaze first, and then she looked at him herself. Sitting on the bench next to her was the very prince she had been afraid to dream of as a child, because he was too good-looking even for a prince. Tall, he sat, but it still felt that way. Gorgeously built, black tank top revealing swarthy arms, pumped biceps. His hair was black too, and his eyes were light gray, almost white, with a dark rim. The kind of eyes they say have a lilt to them. The young man looked at her and smiled. The smile was hard, imperious, and at the same time disposing, almost hypnotizing. Catherine did not remember afterward what he had asked her, but it really was like hypnosis. She understood. Whatever he would have offered her, she would have agreed, said yes. She shook her head, as if trying to shake off an obsession, and heard him ask, "Shall we go for a ride?" And he nodded at the big shiny car waiting for him in the parking lot near the park. John was having one of those rare days when he was in a good mood. He didn't realize that he wasn't in the mood for a restaurant or even a bar. He walked through the park and ate ice cream from an ice cream cone, just as he had when he was a child. Then he sat down on a bench and happened to see this aunt. Now, in his current position, he could choose almost any girl, and already well understood what attracted his attention. Very young, folded like Barbie dolls, and most importantly, defenseless. He could break any of them, but he was especially attracted to those in whom he unmistakably recognized victims. There was nothing about this person that he usually liked. Toko was what he called young people, but with blurred figures, unrecognizable faces, and tasteless clothes. However, the girl smelled of something, despair or something, and he caught it unmistakably. Such feelings were akin to enjoying a fine perfume. "Shall we go for a ride?" he repeated. His lips quivered and formed a sneer. He rose in one supple movement, and the girl rose too, without taking her eyes off him, and followed him to the car. John had come to the city alone, without his usual bodyguards, and therefore the car seemed unusually large and empty. Catherine sat in the back seat and looked in the mirror, and he occasionally took his eyes off the road and smiled at her. She didn't ask anything, and he wasn't going to talk to her. What was there to talk about with such a fool? Soon, however, she would sing, but not as she expected. They were already driving through the woods, on the narrow road to his house, when she suddenly said, "I have to get home before dark. I have children." He smiled again. Yes, it was certainly a fairy tale. For some reason, she was reminded of Beauty and the Beast. Only she wasn't a beauty herself, but her companion was. His house was like that enchanted castle when the evil fairy had cast a spell on it. Beautiful, huge, but so gloomy that it made you shiver. The young man himself, though he looked like a prince, had eyes like a monster. "Come in," he said, and led her toward the house, so that the heels of her shoes clacked on the slabs. He had a beautiful apartment with a balcony overlooking the forest. But most of all, John loved the cellar, which stretched under the castle. Here he had a wine cellar and another bedroom, where he went if there was a thunderstorm, since he was afraid of thunderstorms as a child, and his favorite room, where he entertained his guests, or rather, his guests. "Bring wine and something else." John told one of his assistants, "We must feed her first." Catherine couldn't drink at all, but now she was in a strange state. Her nerves were frayed, and yet what surrounded her could be nothing but a dream. She convinced herself of this. What other explanation could she think of for what was going on? John poured her a large glass of wine, and she drank it down like water. And of course, in a few minutes, she was drunk, and everything that happened after that huge bed, his hands, his eyes. So close that there was nothing in the world but them. It was all a dream and nothing more. Then she cried. "Are you crying already?" he asked carelessly, not realizing that "already" was the key word in the phrase, for then she was bound to cry. She sniffled even more desperately. "Why is it like this?" she asked, either to herself or to him, or to someone else, to fate or something else. "What do you mean, like this?" he asked. He didn't even throw a blanket over himself. "Why is it that I've been the worst since I was a kid, bullied by everyone, and never had a chance to change things? And now I know what's going on is a hoax of some kind. I'm either gonna wake up and none of this is happening, or you're just gonna kick me out." And crying, She began to tell him her life. She wasn't ashamed now, and it didn't seem to her that she was acting strangely, opening up to a man who was basically a stranger, with whom she was connected only in bed, and nothing else. That's just the way it is. She talked about how she'd been teased for her beggarly clothes. What else could her mother afford? She was always dropping things, breaking things, getting into trouble. How did the girls like to have a rat like that around, with whom they were beauties and favorites of fate? All these girls had told him about themselves before. They begged him to pity them. They talked about their old parents, about their beloved brothers and sisters, about the fact that life was just beginning for them. They were all happy in that past life and dreamed of returning to it. And this girl was 100% chick, and she was as bored with life as he was. Because everyone was bullying her, and the only person she had any hope of change would prefer her to someone else. And something stirred in his soul for the first time in years. "Get out of here," he told her. "What?" She sobbed again, unable to hear. "Get out of here," I said. "Get dressed, and now they're taking you back to town. You're kicking me out too," she said in a hopeless voice. "I'm the unhappiest." "You're the luckiest." He smiled his most charming smile. "You don't know how lucky you are. Get out of here." He got up and walked out. The hem of his silk robe made his swift movements look like black wings. 10 minutes later, the uncomprehending Catherine was getting into the car. She heard the black-bearded man who was supposed to drive her ask John, "Are you letting her go, master? She's memorized this place, hasn't she? She'll never come here again." John leaned against the door and waved to Catherine. "Forget it all, understand? It's gonna be bad." "She won't listen to you, master," the man said quietly. "If she doesn't, she'll regret it," and John left without looking back. Blackbeard drove the car so fast that the scenery outside the window merged. "Don't drive," Catherine asked. "I'm afraid." "There's nothing to be afraid of now," he said in a guttural accent, but no one was kidding. "Forget you were here. If you come again, you'll stay here forever." He dropped her off on the outskirts of town and sped off just as quickly, leaving her on the deserted highway wondering how to get home if she had no money in her pocket. Sure enough, home was Armageddon. Frightened Aunt Maria called all the authorities for the 5th time, and the children, left to themselves, began to cry, sensing that something bad had happened. The mother hung around Catherine's neck, squeezed her daughter in her arms, so that she was in pain, kissed her wherever she could. "Alive, alive," she repeated. "Leave me alone, Mom." Catherine, on trembling from fatigued legs, went to the bedroom and fell asleep, barely touching his head pillow. It seemed that after this incident, the higher powers had taken Catherine under their protection. Carlos met with her again and secretly handed over a decent amount of money. "Invest in a house," he advised. "You know, I cannot help you regularly, but maybe I can do something for you and the children from time to time." "And if I get married?" Catherine asked, squinting. "And someone else will raise your boys." "God willing," Carlos answered sincerely and corrected himself. "God willing that you meet a good man whom you will love. Then you and the children will be happy." That moment was enough for Catherine to realize what she had been unable to accept all the previous years. Carlos does not and has never truly loved her or his own sons. He simply had enough sense of duty not to abandon them to their fate. There was no telling how she would have survived this before. And now it didn't hurt her too much, because for the first time in her life, she was truly in love. Yes, with the same mysterious man who was as handsome and enigmatic as the hero of the novel and had condescended to her. She must have touched him in some way, made him like her, or none of this would have happened. The money Carlos gave her went to pay the extra, and very soon Catherine and her children and Aunt Maria moved into a 2-room apartment. Modest, but quite decent, in a well-to-do neighborhood. Aunt Maria sighed as if she had taken a heavy load off her back. "Now let's take a little breather," she said. "Aha," Catherine agreed nonchalantly. "Mom, I'm pregnant." Aunt Maria sat up like that. "But how?" she babbled. "You have that completely no mind. You knew that Carlos did not marry you, so did not realize that, and he would place thought." "Well, I know what he was thinking. Maybe it's not him," Catherine said with her lips so that her mother didn't hear her. "But it's definitely not him." Her mother's brow creased again with a look of anguish. For weeks her fierce arguments with her daughter continued. Aunt Maria insisted that the child must never be left behind. Carlos will not give anything more, and already generous. And Catherine, who has no sensible education, no job, no rich relatives, will not pull 3 children for nothing. Of course, the mother was right, but Catherine stubborn. She wanted to give birth to this child and would never tell Aunt Maria what she was up to. She dreamt of John. He came to her every night, and in the morning, when she woke up, it was the beginning of a long, burdensome day with his endless responsibilities. Catherine hoped for one thing, that sooner or later John would make himself known, and if he didn't, if it was to be his child, then Catherine would find him. Sheep loved novels, which she liked to read, convinced that the man simply cannot resist seeing the hair. The fact that Carlos easily abandoned his sons did not convince Catherine of anything. "I will give birth to this baby," Catherine firmly told her mother, and began to look for arguments that would convince the old woman in the justification of such a decision. 3 children. This is already a mother of many children. There will be benefits, allowances, and she will go to work. Crying, Aunt Maria arranged for her daughter to work as a social worker, so that she could at least get maternity pay, she said. Ekaterina had never had such a hard time. Her mother always tried to spare her from housework, and now this very work piled on her tenfold. Heavy bags, which had to carry her old people from the stores and account for every penny. Endless queues at polyclinics. Ekaterina stood for coupons for her wards, took for them certificates from utility companies. She also washed windows, cleaned the closets, scrubbed the floors, and spoon-fed the infirm. These odors, she complained to her mother in the evening. "I can't take it anymore. All the corners smell of old things. I'm sorting out my clothes, and sometimes I'm sick to my stomach." "Be patient," Aunt Maria replied nonchalantly. "You chose this fate. If you had done the right thing, you would have found a good man and had a family. No, you stole someone else's husband. Here, boomerang and flew." Catherine stopped looking for sympathy from her mother. It remained only to look forward to the day when he will go on maternity leave, and at least from hard work will be spared. In the maternity hospital, Catherine remembered and was surprised that this time she came here by ambulance. On previous occasions, she had been brought here by Carlos. Catherine could not pay for a separate room either. But other than that, everything went great, and she had a baby girl. "Give her to me for a minute, or at least show her," still in the delivery room asked Catherine. One look at the baby was enough for her to realize that she was not mistaken. Black hair was unusually thick and long for a newborn, and her eyes were exactly like her father's, light gray with a mist. So bright and unusual that it was clear that their color would not change, and they would remain that way. Aunt Maria was bitterly convinced that only the hump will be corrected by the grave. Becoming a mother of many children, Catherine did not take up her mind. She could not concentrate on the children in the household. Having done the most necessary things, she was immersed in herself and hovered somewhere in her thoughts. "Settle down," Aunt Maria told her. "If you hope that I'll give you a shoulder all your life, it's not so. My blood pressure's skyrocketing. I need some peace and quiet. Sometimes you want to take a pill and go to sleep and sleep until you sleep, but you don't. If anything happens to your boys, they come running to me. They're used to grandma being there for them. And when the baby cries at night, a mother has to sleep half-eyed. I used to wake up when you, little one, just move in your crib, and you be asleep. How many times I got up at night to comfort your daughter? I was your only one, and I have a lot of children," snapped at Catherine. "And who is to blame for this?" sarcastically asked Aunt Maria. "Remember, drive me into the coffin, you will be even harder." But Catherine did not believe in such a prospect. Her mother was always, and all her life remained too living, pulled any load. And now, of course, she is just boasting. All her free time Catherine spent to find out anything about John, to find a place where he lives. At one time, she couldn't even figure out where he had brought her. She could only orient herself by the time she'd spent on the road and the fact that it was a forested area. Now she was looking at images on the internet, satellite images, and finally figured out this huge house, located in the deepest part of the forest. She decided to go there with her daughter. Let her have a girl, not a boy, but the appearance of little Ada is such that it is impossible to doubt the paternity. But then there was an event, not that upset her plans, but made her postpone them for a while. Aunt Maria had a hypertensive crisis, yes, so much so that had to call an ambulance. A guy arrived, very inexperienced, all the time calling someone on the phone, advising what and how to do. He measured her blood pressure, put a couple of pills under her tongue, gave her an injection, and said goodbye. And 2 hours later, Aunt Maria was no longer able to comprehend anything. She had lost her speech, and the right half of her body was desensitized. This time an experienced team arrived, and the paramedic immediately sent Catherine to find helpers for transportation. "Your mother has a stroke. We take her to the hospital." But even here, Catherine had not yet realized how serious it was. She had no doubt that her mother would pull through. She was only worried about one thing: how many days she will spend in the hospital, and whether she, Catherine, at this time with the household. Therefore, when she received the call that Aunt Maria had died, the news stunned her completely. For a while she sat there and just came to herself. Of course, then began the whole cycle of organizing funerals and memorial services. And if there is no one to take on these worries, then the relatives have no time to plunge headlong into grief. Fortunately, the women around whom Aunt Maria had worked all her life raised money and organized the funeral. But when the funeral and all the ceremonies were left behind, Catherine felt that the world collapsed. All the troubles, which had previously taken on her mother, now lay on her. The money left. Caught in a palico, teachers in the kindergarten complained that her boys are fighting off hands and also had to look for a new job, more money, because otherwise their small family will have to live on hunger. Catherine tried to get in touch with Carlos and poke at least some money, but it turned out that the former friend changed the number. Called the home number, the wife came to the phone and recognized Catherine by the silence. She was breathless enough to answer the phone. "I'll call the police," Carlos' wife promised. "I'll tell them you're blackmailing us, and make sure they believe me." There was no one else to turn to, so Catherine decided to carry out her long-standing plan. First, she went to the local psychic and took her all the cash she had left. "So what do you need?" asked the Vidunia, Dodorot, or spell. Catherine thought for a moment. If it was about Carlos, everything would be clear. Turn away from his wife, a spell to her, to Catherine. A complex service. But nothing about John was clear. "About one man I want to know," said Catherine honestly, "how he treats me and whether we will ever be together." The fortune teller did not behave in an original way. She asked for a picture of John and something that belonged to him. Catherine had both. She found the photo by accident on some website, and the one time she'd been to the castle, she'd brought a handkerchief. That little piece of silk was the only proof that she hadn't dreamed the whole story. And Ada's daughter, of course, another proof. The fortune teller first held her hand over the handkerchief, and Catherine noticed how her fingers trembled. Then the woman looked into the picture and recoiled. She tried to restrain herself, but still Catherine noticed the movement. "Don't go near him," the fortune teller said. Catherine wrinkled her nose unhappily. "What nonsense? Why, he is not even seemingly married." "And close, do not come close." The fortune teller quickly pushed away from herself a handkerchief and a photo, and then leaned over to Catherine and said, looking her straight in the eyes, "This man is evil. He has nothing but evil in his soul. If you come near him, there will be great misfortune. But I have his daughter." Catherine couldn't stand it, she shrieked. "Does he know about it?" "No," she confessed. "And don't tell him," said the fortune teller. "Never tell him. Does the girl look like him?" "Very much." "Then get out of here, so he can't even see her by chance in the street." "But what kind of trouble are you talking about?" interrogated Catherine. The fortune teller laid out the cards on the table, and each next card she laid out met with a stiff nod, accurately saying, "I expected so." The cards were all black, spades and some crosses. "Better you don't know." The fortune teller grinned stiffly and mixed the cards. Catherine lost sleep. And if before she was ready to believe the otherworldly forces, now more and more the desire was breaking through in her to do exactly as she wanted. Not to listen to anyone, and be as it will be. The day came when, having sent the boys to kindergarten in the morning, she called a cab and named the village where the road to the castle, lost in the woods, began. Catherine tried to dress her daughter as best as possible. The girl was naturally pretty, and now she looked like a doll. On the road Ada, John couldn't remember if there had ever been a time when he'd been loved in his own family. Maybe when his mother hadn't divorced his father yet. But when he turned 3, his father had already left for the ends of the earth with his new love, and his mother had a new husband. Humiliated by her husband's infidelity, she hurried to prove to herself and to the whole world it is worth it to dissolve the marriage, as she will not be alone for a single day. The mother was not a very good-looking woman, but they say of such women, she has something in her. Tall, thin like a model, very beautiful haircut. She always got her hair cut by the best hairdresser in town. Big dark eyes. A little bit of her mother reminded him of a young Jacqueline Kennedy. John thought about it when he became an adult and accidentally saw a photo of the widow of the American president. Photos of his father at home did not remain. Exactly, mother wanted to break with the past, absolutely all ties. And the stepfather was a man completely invisible, as my grandmother would say. Soapy. When he married my mother, he was about 50 years old and had no children of his own. It would seem, be happy that you got a son. It remains to be seen whether a common child will be born. But stepfather John immediately hated. At the same time, he was smart enough not to tell his mother about it. If the stepfather openly stated his feelings and demanded that the child anywhere to give grandparents or in a boarding school, the mother would have nothing left but to part with him. But the stepfather said that the stepson has a difficult character. This is a 3-year-old, and if he is not put on the right path, the family will be bad. After a few months, John feared his stepfather like fire. They had a dog, an old mutt who liked to sleep in the closet. She would sneak in there, snuggle up in the dark, and fall asleep in a pile of stuff. John began to follow suit. His stepfather came home from work before his mother. He wouldn't let her stepson go to kindergarten. The boy would be totally spoiled there. So John hung around the empty house all day. He didn't know how to tell time yet, but he knew that when both hands of the clock slid down, it was time to hurry to his hiding place. He would lurk there, having learned to bolt the closet from the inside and wait until his mother returned from work. His stepfather, on the other hand, never looked for him. When he arrived, he threw off his heavy shoes with pleasure. He stomped into the kitchen, pulling out what his mother had prepared that morning. John knew the food was primarily for him, but he tried to take as little as possible. The most important thing for him was to keep his stepfather fed and satisfied. The man always brought a drink from work. Not vodka, not my God. My stepfather insistently emphasized that strong alcohol he does not take in his mouth never goes down to white, but beer was his specialty. And by the time his mother came back, he had time to get pretty drunk. Canned stepfather threw in the garbage chute, and the mother had to believe that no one drank here, and the man is sober as a glass. It was the kind of game, John realized, that they played every night. At first, when the boy was still in hiding, he would witness these drinking parties, and his stepfather would beat him, not sparingly, not in proportion to his strength beat him to keep him quiet and not to talk. It could well have been a disaster. Once the stepfather threw the kid so that he hit his temple on the corner of the nightstand. But John was lucky. He was never seriously injured. And the stepfather threatened, if the boy tells about the beatings of his mother, the next day you will kill him. And John kept quiet. He even persuaded his mother to let him bathe by himself, so she wouldn't accidentally see his bruises and bruises on his body. He realized now that this was just another dirty, behaved very quietly, and Catherine thanked God for that. She was terribly agitated, and she did not want to deal with the whims of the little girl. Which house should I take you to? The cab driver asked when they entered the village. Catherine hastily pulled out of her purse money. Here, but if you can, we'll go further, it won't take long. I'll show you on the map on my phone. And I'll pay the extra amount, of course. The cab driver didn't mind. He'd been trying to get Catherine to talk to him all the way there, and he hadn't given up trying to talk to her now. I've never driven here, he said, obediently sending the car forward. What a beautiful forest. In the fall there are probably a lot of mushrooms. We should get together sometime for a silent hunt. And Catherine sat there, tense as a string. At any minute one of those black-bearded scary men could come out on the road and stop the car. Oh, the clairvoyant was probably right. She should have listened to her. But they made it all the way to the castle without a hitch. And the cab driver whistled. I didn't know that we have such beauty here. I was in Togliatti. There is such a Garibaldi castle. But there the place is crowded. It's easy to get there. But here, how much effort has been invested, and people have built in the middle of nowhere. They'll lose income. And for the hotel is inconvenient, too far from the city, and on holidays for the same reason will not be filmed. And I'm not talking about photo shoots. Catherine slipped him a few more banknotes. Wait for you? Asked the cab driver. Hey, what did you say? No, perhaps not. Catherine took the girl in her arms and went to the gate. It's all the same now, dead or gone. She heard the car start behind her. The cab driver drove away, and Catherine was already walking down the driveway, wondering if anyone would open the door for her. A tall, dark-haired man in a black shirt appeared in front of her, as if from under the ground. There was a question in his gaze, but there was something else that made Catherine shudder. A cold, ruthless determination to do anything. Me? She babbled. Here's a girl. I've been here before. And now, this is your master's daughter. The man glanced at the child, then made a sign to Catherine to stay put and disappeared into the house. She waited a long time, about a quarter of an hour. Ada grew weary and began to whimper softly. Finally, the door opened, and the man gestured again for her to come in, then led her down the long, gloomy corridors. Finally, he nodded, this way. The room she entered was a library, bookshelves from floor to ceiling. A desk, probably insanely expensive, probably stolen from a museum somewhere. Anyway, it looked like a guest from the 19th century. She didn't notice John right away. He was standing in the darkest corner. You woke me up, he said. Catherine was expecting a lot of things, but not that phrase. It was not how she wanted to start the conversation. That's why she was confused and asked, It's the middle of the day. Have you slept yet? It doesn't matter to me what time of day it is outside. I often confuse day with night. John sat down in an armchair and looked at Catherine with the baby in her arms. To her, he did not offer her a seat. Catherine stepped forward. Here, I wanted to show you. This is yours. Ours. I've already been told. John didn't even look at the baby. And what do you want? I wanted you two to meet. Catherine felt like a complete fool. I warned you not to come here, John said almost gently. Why did you disobey? But our daughter, he said, as if speaking to himself, this is not a good time for me, and my best friend is silence. I don't need any unnecessary rumors, gossip, searches, at least not yet. So I'm gonna give you one more chance, but I need to get it into your stupid head that there won't be a third. So you're going to leave now, but alone. The baby stays here. How? Catherine's mouth dropped open. And you'll know now John was mouthing the words, that if you ever try to come here again or investigate my house, your offspring will have his neck snapped immediately. As long as you're quiet, the girl will live here quietly. She'll be looked after. What are you so nervous about? It's not that bad for you. You're not a very good mother. I was curious, and I know you came to me that time, forgetting about home and kids. Forget about that little brat too. And now, get out. Back home. Catherine began to go crazy. Now it noticed already in neighbors. She could go to the stairwell in a nightgown, untidy, and stand like that for hours until someone took her back to the apartment. What are you doing here? A neighbor pounced on her. Waiting, answered Catherine lifelessly. Who are you waiting for? Where's your daughter? Catherine thought for a moment. She's with relatives. She's fine. Good. Then you go home and lie down. Let's call a doctor for you. But Catherine, not listening, like a somnambulist, wandered into the depths of her apartment and the door closed behind her. But when her son started knocking on the same neighbor's door and crying, asking for something to eat, the woman could not stand it and called first the social services, and those already, a psychiatric team. The boys were sent to a rehabilitation center, and Ekaterina was put on injections. She was not found to have any severe, incurable mental illness, but she was clearly still inadequate. In the first, most acute time she was lying alone. She was given sleeping pills and other medications. Then she was moved to a triple room. Neighbors Natalie and Katie. Compared to Catherine, they seemed quite healthy. They went to eat in the hospital canteen and whispered long after the lights were turned off in the evenings. Natalie was just overstressed, too much on her shoulders. And the moment her life took a turn for the better, she began to hallucinate. There was a time when she loved this town, as a child. Childhood dresses everything in magical colors. It finds its poetry in the courtyards where boiler rooms and mechanic shops operate. Every sprawling butch could be a castle for a doll. Every high-rise building, shining in the evenings with its lights on, a huge ship sailing far away on a dark ocean. And then comes youth, which lifts the soul on tiptoe, and one sees with eyes that one will never be allowed to see again. The summer of her 17th birthday. Graduation exams. Rainy, warm, and windy days. Green waterfalls of poplar trees. Huge bouquets of peonies, pale pink and white. Just opened. Smelling dizzying. Wet with rain. A light silk dress, white, in the same pink colors. And a wind that seemed to carry her through the world, through life as its ruler. She longed fiercely for the institute. The dirt and bustle of the dormitory was nothing. It's always being in the open that's unbearable. 5 people in a room. 5 girls without any imagination, dreaming of staying forever in this regional center. Why? To avoid being assigned to the village. Which way? By marriage, it almost doesn't matter with whom. As long as I have a local registration in my passport. Dormitory, university, streets, people everywhere. Not for a minute to be alone with herself, not to forget what is dear to her. At night, she dreamed of the silence of her room. And only a few times, no more often than birthdays and New Year's nights, the one who was not there in life came in her dreams and took her hand in his, and everything came true. Her childhood happiness came back to her, and flight and the unspoken things that melted and slipped away as soon as she opened her eyes. She thought that she would return home and the institute would remain in her memory as a terrible dream. But that day came, and it became clear at once that one does not enter the same river twice. It's not the same anymore. She's an adult, and she's on her own at work, and no one is responsible for her life but herself. And in the evenings there is no strength for anything but the realization of the passing of time and the emptiness, the fruitlessness of this flow. And that's no way to think. What was there to live for? She believed that she might never marry, because with rare constancy no one liked her. Though she was attractive in appearance, even unusually attractive, but always she was carried in these cloudy spheres and others perceived it as excessive seriousness, looking down on everything, and she did not even try to court. But still she married. This man was simple enough not to notice anything strange in her, and she was already tormented by the loneliness she had longed for before. Spouses are two oxen drawn to the same plow. It was partly true. Now there is no fear of delayed wages or buying potatoes for the fall. There are other shoulders strong enough to carry sacks, and no matter how trivial, the warmth of another man's body nearby. And the dreams were less and less frequent, or rather, almost no dreams at all. I wish I could get to bed, and as in a black pit, from which in the morning you hardly come out. And when the children went, she knew that both close and unfamiliar people condemned her for such luxury. A child, like a car, requires a certain amount of cash. No money, don't have one. White socks, lacy blankets, sparkling bottles, and herself with a nice stroller. She had her last child during the default, on that very August day, when cash melted like smoke and stores hastily closed to rewrite prices. Somebody got even richer, built themselves another villa in the Canaries, and her newborn was deprived of the most modest dowry, and her warm winter coat was taken away from her. Running in the cold, almost in a raincoat, neighbors aghast, and said the traditional words about the proliferating poverty. And then, shoes with bows pre-fashionable from a box in the attic pulled out of the attic. Empty soup for lunch, and the same squirrel carousel month after month. I had to get a job, but where could I find one? Young people have grown up, they understand computers and are looking for the most fashionable positions. Managers, supervisors, merchandisers, or something in the same vein, you can't pronounce it. And simply no children, no whips, always ready for anything. The unemployment office is shrugging their shoulders. They have 2 vacant positions, a cleaner and a checkroom attendant. Tears at night instead of dreams. What does the day ahead hold in store for us? And there's no hope in sight. Then suddenly she was offered a job. Later she'll say, it's an idiot's dream come true. And not just any job for the envy of others. The quiet and spaciousness of a private office. This very office equipment, previously only seen on television. Co-workers are polite, and the salary can plug all the holes. Dress up, raise children, teach, treat. There's enough for everything. Except for the boss. All roads lead to Rome. All ends end up in her. Her angry, threatening, I'll fire you. She's young, but the boss has to justify her existence, and she's got it all wrong. Do it wrong 10 times. Get out of your skin. It won't be the same. She come home at midnight. Didn't see the kids. Computer lines merging in her eyes. Panic in her heart that she's gonna get fired. And what? It's the end of the world. You can't keep teetering on the edge for too long. You can't go this way or that way, but you can't always be on the edge. No one believes she applied for the job herself. How could they? For a job like that, other people would take it with their hands and feet and teeth. In this day and age, in your position, no one realized that there's no more strength to be afraid, and there's no place in the soul where they wouldn't wipe their feet on you. It was like she woke up one August day. She went out on the porch into the garden. It was a quiet morning, warm, Smells like apples. There's a carpet of them on the grass. We should pick them, make jam. Foam for the children. For the second time this summer, roses are blooming lushly. I can pick a bouquet in the morning dew and take it home to the table. Soft pink, dark red, lemon yellow roses. Dainty as you don't see in every painting. She cuts the roses and quietly, before anyone gets up, recites a prayer. And it's not scary and calm. She recites ancient words, grown. And how smart they'd gotten. There was no time to notice life. And now it is as if she stopped, amazed eyes to discover. Yes, how good the morning. The same freshness that was in her 17. And the children who wait for all her tales. And the books she remembered as friends. And the whole world, which is not close to her at all, rejoice in it. And that night, before she could put her head on her pillow, came the one she thought would never come again. And he gave her his hand. Katie's situation was different. She thought she was desperately unlucky. For the first time in her life, she wanted to kill a man. If it was a villain, that would be fine, but no. To understand the extent of her desperate bloodlust, please know that it was a quiet, good-natured man. The man with the camera. Everyone recognized that he had talent. His exhibitions gathered the inhabitants of a small town, and works for sale, sold out instantly. These were not soulless paintings from a store. His works breathed. Everything in front of you was alive, awakening, rising from behind the vulgar sun, or asleep in a stack of boys. And behind the awe with which the author caught such moments, you could feel the kindness and sensitivity of his soul. But when this recognized genius decided to make their department happy, and by Valentine's Day to make each a portrait. No, at first she was as excited as everyone else. She was rarely photographed. In the last 5 years, when she changed her passport from the old to the new, there's got to be something left over from every period in her life, right? Besides, Even was so conscientious. Standing up, sitting down, lying down, taking pictures of you from all angles, turning you this way and that. Surely it will be something to hang on the wall and even secretly admire herself. Yes, it's me. She deliberately let her hair loose and hid her chin in the luxury of her black and white sparkling Blackmore collar. She kept her eyes closed for a moment, then opened them to give her eyes a look of mystery. While leafing through a thick glossy magazine at the hairdresser's, she'd accidentally read that this was how models did it. It was supposed to look like this. Accent on the face, the rest in a haze. Dark eyes, a scattering of curly hair. She was at the age when the face becomes defined. The experience is reflected on it, but not yet aged. Youthful self-confidence was being replaced by a realization of her actual strength, and that meant a lot, too. When Evan, with his usual quiet smile, put the pictures on her desk, she realized she was capable of murder. No, what kind of camera does he have that only takes pictures of cockroaches, so that every hair on their legs could be distinguished? But who would do that to a woman? There she is, please, awkwardly propping up a wall that's just been decorated in Euro style. Where to begin to put a fat cross on herself? The top. Her hair isn't curly at all, but hangs down in shreds as if chemically burned. Every day of her 32 years is stamped on her face, at least the darkest of those days. It's not the look of an arrogant movie diva, but of a dog looking for a master. Oh, there's a comparison. The paws hang down like spaniel ears, and the eyes like the same dog left on the street, and every wrinkle is drawn with mascara, and eyes that are red from the computer. And Evan's the one who got screwed after that, definitely. I wonder if that's how he shoots his Varvara, who never leaves his lips. Varvara wanted new shoes, Varvara read a book, Varvara says this and that, and thinks otherwise. Everyone already knows everything about Varvara, and her popularity pisses off the female co-workers. But if Evan filmed his capricious wife in this way, their work team would be orphaned. She sat there swallowing tears. A photo, my ass? An artist, they called him. Von Selyunin is a different matter. She has not been photographed by him, only heard that he first of all drags each of his models to the wash basin. He washes off everything he can. Then he puts her makeup on, does her hair, wraps her in all sorts of things, drapes her, showing off what's beautiful about the model. Maybe it'll just be the hand, the long thin fingers, the ring, and everything else in the semi-darkness. A girl I know, Maddie, almost got married that way. All the Western suitors went crazy over her portraits. She picked out the most worthy one, went to Washington to meet him, and on the platform immediately recognized him. He was in the same jeans and t-shirt as in his photo. But he passed by, and even after a call to recognize her, did not want to recognize his dream in her. But so immediately faced the table. At home, mom saw that her daughter has tears in her eyes and began to timidly comfort. Maybe it's the bangs. Take it away. And it's not about the bangs, she answered gloomily. It's about the face that looks out from under it. You can't take it off. If everything in life was like in the novels, there would be a gift of fate in the person of a cool macho. And he would comfort her and tell her that she's really beautiful, and she would turn from his words before her eyes, at least into Julia Roberts. In life, unfortunately, macho men don't just fall out of the sky. And yet something in her was so deeply affected that she decided to take a very unusual step. She went to Anna. Anna was the best hairdresser in town. In fact, still a girl, herself wearing a simple ponytail, with clients work wonders. Anna immediately realized that with a gloomy client it's better not to chirp, and really transform her as far as possible. Anna, in this case, performed the role of macho. For 3 hours at least, she transformed her into a woman with a capital letter. She cut her hair, curled it, styled it. I breathed on her face, and sometimes I didn't even breathe while applying makeup. When she opened her eyes, she really looked like a queen. Waves of vibrant brown hair flowed along her face, blooming with the most delicate colors. That lilac translucency of the eyelids, the well-defined lips, the youthful blush. From the hairdresser's store, she went to the store and paid for the dress she had not dared to buy for months, and no one else had dared, because of the price. The women at work were numb, to say the least. Crowd came to her office to greedy female eyes to embrace her new look and find in it at least something not that to calm the soul. They felt her dress. They could have groped her face to wipe off the blush. But those women are nothing. Ivan would come in and give her his professional male gaze. He's gonna grab his machine. He came. He walked briskly past her desk, but stopped and looked at her face. Why are you so red? He asked anxiously. Do you have a fever? That same day, Ola began to feel as if her heart was stopping. Just like that. Stopped beating, that's all. She clutched her chest. It stopped. No pulse. Call an ambulance. After a month, during which such attacks were repeated regularly, and she was put under treatment in the psychoneurological department. When the pills began to work on Catherine, she paid attention to the doctor who treated her and new friends on the ward. To each he treated in the utmost attention, tried to help, but a bitter crease forever lay between his eyebrows. He's a widower, Natalie whispered, English, but he used to live in Mexico. So what? Catherine raised her eyebrows. His wife died there, an accidental victim, and his daughter was left an invalid. He's sick himself. When he got a job here, they found out that he had cancer. They said, how are you gonna work? It's a lot of work, and he said he could handle it. He said he had to survive and get back on his feet. Otherwise, who will take care of the girl? She's just a little girl, and you know he did it. The disease began to recede. Catherine began to greet Anthony with a special smile. He treated her successfully, and she felt better. She knew that now she would do her best to make the doctor pay attention to her, succumb to her charms. There's a woman who's a mother, and then there's a woman of easy virtue. Well, that's the B that Catherine's mother used to say. The key word here is woman, Catherine replied with a smile. Thoughts of the baby retreated, disturbing her less and less. Potty will not hurt the girl, she thought, remembering John. He is her father. How can he hurt his daughter? No, still Catherine was incorrigible.
On another cold January morning, Charlotte lay in her bed and stared up at the ceiling. For 6 months now, every day had started this way. She lay there, horrified at the thought of a dull, meaningless day ahead of her. Charlotte was not yet 30 years old. She wasn't bad looking, but she had never been able to find a husband and build a family. Her rare liaisons with men lasted no more than 6 months. She didn't understand why she had no luck on the personal front. Either men were bad or her character was so bad, but Charlotte didn't worry much about it. She didn't want to start any serious relationships. For several years, she was immersed in caring for her elderly grandmother, the kindest woman who had raised Charlotte since she was 3 years old, ever since her parents had been killed in an accident. She and her grandmother had bailed each other out back then. The grandmother had kept the girl out of the orphanage by taking on the task of raising her, and Charlotte had given the grandmother a new meaning to life. A meaning that was to raise her beloved granddaughter. Most likely, that's what helped the woman cope with the loss of her only son and daughter-in-law. 3 years ago, the grandmother fell ill. She could move around the flat by herself, but still she needed constant care. And of course her granddaughter began to look after her, taking her to doctors, shopping, doing all the housework. At the time, Charlotte was 26 years old. She had just found a good job with a decent salary and was preparing to go for a promotion. Charlotte even thought about moving out of her grandmother's flat into her own, at first rented, and then planned to take out a mortgage, but the elderly woman's illness overturned all these plans. Without thinking, Charlotte forgot about career heights, stayed in her old position, and all her free time devoted to her grandmother. They were unpretentious in everyday life, so Charlotte's salary and grandmother's payments were enough to pay for doctors and medicines. Charlotte hardly remembered her parents. They were often traveling even before their deaths, so they left their young daughter to her grandmother. Because of this, Charlotte had only a few memories of her parents, and she thought some of them were just dreams. And she and her grandmother had hit it off from the start. The older woman had managed to replace Charlotte's dad and mom. In all the years they'd lived together, they hadn't had a single major conflict. Even when Charlotte was going through a transitional age, it may have had something to do with the fact that her grandmother worked as a school teacher and had a good understanding of how to get along with children. For Charlotte, her grandmother was a self-evident part of her life, and she did not think about her death. Even when the woman had had an accident 3 years ago, Charlotte had pushed away the thought that her grandmother would soon be gone. She just gave all the help she could, tried to organize good treatment, and hoped for the best. Before she died, Grandma didn't get worse. She wasn't taken to hospital. She spent the day as usual reading, watching TV, calling her neighbor, and inquiring about her granddaughter's life. Toward nightfall, she said goodnight to Charlotte, and Charlotte went to her room. The next day, Grandma didn't wake up. The days of funeral chores merged into one terrible dream for Charlotte. She couldn't even remember how she had organized everything, how the funeral and the wake had gone. She just wanted to get over it and forget it all as soon as possible. But after all the funeral procedures came an even worse state for Charlotte's silence. It was not only psychologically, but physically difficult for her to return after work to the flat where no one was waiting for her, to the flat where the TV did not work, where there was no aroma of something tasty, where there was no warmth and coziness. She hated waking up in the morning for exactly the same reason. No one else wished her a good morning and good luck before work. She didn't understand why she had to get up every morning and come home every evening now. 6 months of despondency, only occasionally replaced by happy evenings spent with her friend in cafes or at each other's houses. This morning didn't bode well for the day to be any different from the previous ones. Charlotte reluctantly got up, had a coffee and a sandwich, and got ready for work. Despite a good salary, Charlotte dressed, to put it mildly, without glamour. She wore the same clothes for several years, and her winter down jacket, from which the fluff was always trying to come out, had recently celebrated its 5th anniversary. So from the outside, she looked like a poor girl, a typical gray mouse. Almost running, she reached the tram stop and went to work. 8:55, the office was already noisy. The bosses were strict about lateness. Charlotte walked into her office, which was shared with her friend Terry and 2 other female staff members. "What are you doing out of sorts?" her friend asked Charlotte thoughtfully as she sat down in her seat. "I don't know, I just can't. It's the same every day. It's boring." Charlotte showed a thick stack of papers on her desk. "What's all this for?" "You didn't say that when you walked into this office." Terry reminded Charlotte of her first days on the job 4 years ago. Indeed, Charlotte was a model worker with a burning eye and a well-functioning brain. She genuinely loved her job. She didn't just go to it for the money. Colleagues at first were even afraid to approach her, thinking that such efficiency hides a cunning, bossy girl, ready to go over the heads of other employees for the sake of career. But Terry managed, at some point, to break through this shell of a workaholic and see her as a very ordinary, modest, and kind girl. Most likely they managed to get close on the contrast. In contrast to Charlotte, Terry was an extremely sociable, cheerful girl, although not distinguished by great efficiency. Sometimes even Charlotte had to cover Terry's shortcomings in front of her superiors, but such help from her colleague was not worth much trouble. Over the last 6 months, things had changed. Charlotte would come into the office, slumped, do her work and leave. Each time Terry tried to cheer her friend up in some way. This time, she made the same attempt. "Charlotte, let's go get some air. I heard they opened a bar nearby today. The girls say it's a great place." A bar? Why not? It had been over a month since the last time she'd been out with Terry, and Charlotte decided to give herself a break. But after a couple of minutes, she realized, "No, Terry, I can't tonight." "Why not?" "Come on, we've got to get back to normal. Do you want to go shopping before the bar? 'Cause you've turned into a mate." "No, I'd really like to, but I've already arranged to go to the bank tonight." "The bank? Is there something wrong with your card, or did you miss a payday yesterday?" "There's nothing wrong with the payroll. It's just, yesterday was exactly 6 months since Grandma left and I have to inherit. I thought I wouldn't have to do anything else but register the flat. But the notary called and said that there is some other box in the bank. I'm going to go find out what it is today. So let's reschedule the bar for tomorrow, for example." "Okay." Chuckles, "If it's a good idea, sure, maybe I'll go with you just in case. You're going out of the bank alone tonight, it's dangerous." "Don't worry, I'll go by myself. There won't be any diamonds there. My grandmother lived poorly, worked as a school teacher. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some mistake and the bank just turned me home, for example. They mixed up the safe deposit box and it wasn't really my grandmother's. Whatever." The friends finished talking and got to work. The day passed routinely. The boss in the office came only once, politely asked Terry to correct errors in the report, and left. And Charlotte periodically returned to that mysterious safe deposit box. Before she told Terry about it, the girl had not thought much about inheritance and perceived the forthcoming trips to the bank as an ordinary bureaucratic procedure. But now it didn't seem so ordinary to her anymore. If it's not a mistake, what could be lying there? Perhaps some family jewelry. But then why such a strange place, a safe deposit box? Jewelry is usually kept at home to be looked at or worn. That's what jewelry is. This is a safe deposit box. Charlotte couldn't even remember the last time her grandmother had been to the bank, probably before her illness. Anyway, the closer it got to the end of the day, the more interested Charlotte became. Finally, the clock showed 6 p.m. and all the staff, as if on cue, began to pack up to leave. Charlotte was not usually one of them. She could stay in her office alone until 7, 8, and sometimes even 21 in the evening. Since her interest in work had been lost, she had given that up and started to congregate with everyone else. Perhaps in a crowd of colleagues walking to their bus stops, Charlotte felt less lonely. This time she also jumped up with the others, but not because she wanted to overcome her loneliness. She had to take the tram to the bank, but in the other direction. Charlotte said goodbye to Terry and a few other colleagues and ran to the bus stop. The tram came almost immediately. Charlotte got on it and didn't even bother to take a seat, sitting near the door. There were only 2 stops to go, but for Charlotte the time dragged so slowly that it seemed to her that the tram was traveling across the city. She kept glancing at her watch, worried that she wouldn't make it before the bank closed. It closed at 7 p.m., which was why Charlotte was so worried. When she got to the right stop, Charlotte jumped off the tram and ran to the bank. Fortunately, it was still half an hour before closing time. The girl took a little breath and entered the premises. Taking a number in the electronic queue, Charlotte didn't have to wait long. At this time, there wasn't particularly anyone else in the bank anymore. Charlotte went to the right window and sat down beside it. The banker, a full-bodied man in his 40s, was obviously going home early and was already putting things in his briefcase. "Hello." Charlotte said hello and took out her documents from her bag. "Hello," the banker said, glaring at Charlotte with a grudging look. "I need access to a safe deposit box." "You." The man leaned slightly out of the window, looked at Charlotte again, now more carefully, Why do you need a safety deposit box? I want to see what it looks like, Charlotte replied irritably, looking at the banker's name tag, which read Christopher Brown, Senior Officer in gold letters. Christopher, don't you know what a safe deposit box is for? Don't be rude, girl. The banker replied sternly, give me the number of the safe deposit box and a passport. The banker looked through the passport, wrote down some data, entered the number of the box into the computer. This box is not in your name, said the man in the same stern tone. That's right, not in my name. The box belonged to my grandmother. She passed away 6 months ago, and I inherited it. Here's the inheritance certificate. Charlotte handed the paper to the banker. It says that the box was owned. The banker twirled the certificate, looked at the passport once more and went somewhere else. 2 minutes later he came back and said unhappily, "All right, follow me." Charlotte went with him into another room. The banker opened a heavy metal door, behind which there were hundreds of cells of different sizes. The man looked around and went to one of the boxes. He stuck a small key in the keyhole and opened the lock. Sighing heavily, he reluctantly looked into the cell and was stunned. After standing for a couple of seconds, in a quiet voice he was able to say, "Please come over, the box is open." Charlotte slowly approached the box, as if she wanted to pull a little intrigue, and there was a lot to pull for. In the box was a bar of gold. "Can I take it?" Charlotte asked in a whisper. "Of course, it's your property now," the banker replied kindly. His unhappy tone disappeared. Charlotte took the bar in her hands. It looked just like in the films, shiny, shimmering under the light of the bank lamp, stamped with 999.9 and 1,000 grams. The first number means the proof, the banker explained to Charlotte, and the second the weight. On the back there is another stamp with a number and other necessary information to prove the authenticity. Charlotte didn't really listen to what the banker was telling her. She couldn't believe that she was holding a kilo of pure gold in her hands. Even to the touch, it was different from other metal objects of the same size. It seemed to her that the ingot was soft. It felt as if it was warm. "What am I supposed to do with it?" Charlotte asked rhetorically. The banker shrugged his shoulders in response. It was clear from his eyes that he was upset that the bullion had not gone to him. A strange reaction for a banker who operated large sums of money and jewelry on a daily basis. Perhaps he had only served wealthy clients before. The appearance of large sums of money was no surprise to them. And here a poor girl gets a fortune, just like that, instantaneously. Some people dream of such things all their lives, and perhaps the banker was one of those people. After standing for a few seconds, he warned Charlotte that he had to go and get a form for receiving the contents of the safe deposit box. Charlotte didn't bother with the bureaucratic wording and continued to look at the gold. The banker put another bank employee in his place, apparently to keep Charlotte from clearing the bank. Charlotte shifted her gaze from the bullion to her open safe deposit box. At the bottom of the box was some cardboard that was the same color as the box itself, so the banker didn't pay any attention to it. "Excuse me, please." Charlotte turned to the stone-faced employee. "There is something else in the box. Can I take it too?" "If the box is yours, you can," replied the unemotional employee. Charlotte carefully took out the cardboard. It turned out that it was not a picture, but an envelope made of heavy paper. There was nothing on the envelope, no addressee, no author's name, no stamps, just a blank envelope. Charlotte didn't open it, she just put it in her bag. She realized that there was some message from her grandmother inside, and she didn't want to read it in front of strangers. "Before you leave, you will need to sign some papers," the banker suddenly returned. Charlotte. "Sure. Where do I have to go?" "It's protocol to sign right here. But do you really want to take this with you?" The man gently ran his hand over the ingot. "Why do you ask?" Charlotte was surprised. "Would it be safer to leave it in the safe deposit box, or do you want to sell it right now?" "No, I have all my accounts in another bank, and I think that's where the bullion should be deposited in the near future. I like things to be in their proper place." For a few minutes, Charlotte thought that it was really safer to leave such wealth in the bank. But it wasn't just the desire to move the bullion to another bank that possessed her. The little gold brick had a magical attraction, and Charlotte did not want to give it back so immediately. She wanted to look at it again, put it somewhere at home, maybe even show it to a friend. "As you wish. It's your right," the banker said quickly. "Follow me." Having completed all the bureaucratic procedures with the registration of the bullion, Charlotte went home. She didn't want to take the tram with the gold, so she called a taxi. During the journey, Charlotte had a twofold feeling. On the one hand, she was almost in euphoria at the realization that she was carrying $100,000 in her bag. On the other hand, she was intermittently panic-stricken. She kept squinting at the taxi driver, drawing in her mind plots in which he would take her out into the woods and take the bag away. Then Charlotte looked out of the window carefully to see if the taxi driver was taking her on the right road. "Tell me, why are we going this way?" Charlotte asked when the car turned off the avenue that ran along the tram tracks. "There are repair works ahead," the taxi driver answered calmly. "Half an hour in the traffic jam, but this way we'll go round the courtyards quickly." Charlotte's heart began to race, and it became difficult for her to breathe. After a couple of minutes, she managed to pull herself together. She took out her phone and dialed 112 in advance. Charlotte looked at the road even more carefully. It was dark outside, and it was hard to see anything. She moved to the middle of the back of the car and looked out the driver's window. By the light of the headlights, she recognized a small street that ran along the main avenue. It was just over a kilometer from home. Charlotte calmed down a little and moved back to the passenger door. "Don't worry, we'll be there in a few minutes," the taxi driver said carefully as he watched Charlotte toss and turn on the back sofa. "Yes, okay, I'm calm," Charlotte answered him in a slightly shaky voice. Less than a minute later, the car turned again. "You're off the right track." The navigator answered loudly, and Charlotte realized that she couldn't stay in the car any longer. "Stop here, please," she shouted. "How here?" "We've only got a little bit to go," the taxi driver replied calmly. "I know, but I need to get out here right away." "Okay, whatever you say." The taxi driver sighed heavily and stopped the car. Charlotte quickly slipped the fare money into the taxi driver's hands and got out of the car. Almost at a run, she headed towards her house. It was indeed a short journey, but the second strange turn seemed too suspicious to Charlotte. She ran along the same street that ran along the avenue and soon saw that a road service was standing on it, with a fenced pit dug right in the middle. The workmen were changing a pipe which ran across both the avenue and this street, and so there was nothing suspicious in the taxi driver's sudden turns. He was, however, looking for the easiest way to get to Charlotte's house. Charlotte breathed a sigh of relief and walked towards her house with a quiet step. She even felt a little ashamed of her overcautiousness. How could the taxi driver even know that she had something expensive in her bag? Yes, sudden riches rarely lead to good things. It wasn't long before Charlotte saw her 5-story building on the horizon. Just as she turned into the courtyard, someone tugged her purse sharply, but Charlotte held it firmly in her hands. She turned round and saw a man with a hat and a scarf wrapped around his face. He was pulling the bag towards him, but Charlotte had no intention of letting go. She started screaming loudly. At that moment, 2 men approached them, and the man in the scarf, apparently frightened, let go of the bag and started to run. No one caught up with him. The men approached Charlotte. "Are you all right?" one of them asked fearfully. "Yes, I'm fine, thank you," Charlotte answered after catching her breath. "I'm calling the police," said the other man and pulled out his phone. "Thank you. I don't think he would have got away if it wasn't for you." "Why are you walking alone at this hour?" "I've been used to walking alone around this time all my life." Charlotte talked to her casual acquaintances for a while longer, and the police arrived at the scene. The officers quickly took statements from Charlotte and witnesses, took pictures of the purse, and went to the next call. Charlotte thanked the men again and went home. She didn't like the fact that the police officers had left so quickly. It even seemed to Charlotte that they weren't even going to look for anyone. They just filled out all the paperwork and left. She realized that the police had a heavy workload, but they could have at least taken her to the station so that the experts could fingerprint the bag, draw up a sketch, and do all the other things they usually did in detective shows. Almost immediately, however, Charlotte remembered that the man was wearing gloves, and there was probably no point in fingerprinting her bag. She went up to the first floor, entered the flat, and felt fear again, a very real animal fear for her life. What if the perpetrator decides to come back? After all, if he attacked Charlotte outside her very house, that means he knows her home address. Alexandra pulled out her phone and selected one of the contacts. "Hello, Terry, come to my place soon, please. I'll explain everything later. But it's really hard for me to be alone right now. Thank you. I'll be waiting." Charlotte was afraid her friend had gone to the bar and wouldn't have heard her call. But judging by the background, Terry had gone home after work. Essentially, Charlotte had no one else to turn to for help. Her childhood friends had moved away to different cities, and Terry was the only person she had left who was truly close to her. When her friend agreed to come over, Charlotte felt much calmer. She made some tea and sat down on the sofa. Charlotte put her bag next to her. After taking a few sips, she took the purse in her hands, carefully undid the zip and opened it. The bullion was in place. Before she did so, it occurred to her that there might not be any gold in the purse. After the attack, Charlotte hadn't even checked to see if the man had taken anything, but it was all right. Charlotte didn't bother to take out the bullion. She zipped up the bag and set it back on the couch. What could it have been? She thought about the incident. Maybe it was just an accident. No, I don't believe in such accidents. Right outside my house, a thug purposely tried to snatch my purse. There's no such thing as coincidence. Then who set him on me? The only person who knew I had the bullion was Christopher the banker. He treated me with such hostility, and when he saw the bar, his face changed. That's when he decided to take it from me. He's seen my passport, he knows where I live. What a scoundrel. Exactly. He went out a few times, probably phoning his accomplices. Maybe it's a standard pattern for them. Tracking down the lonely and poor and robbing them of their last possessions. What a nightmare. Charlotte mentally uttered many more words against the banker, but stopped herself at one point. And why him, after all? Didn't anyone else know that she might have something expensive in her bag, like the other bank employees or Terry? Charlotte had told her she was going to the bank to collect her grandmother's inheritance. No, that certainly couldn't be it. She'd known her friend for so many years, and she'd never shown that she was capable of something like that. Yes, Terry doesn't have iron discipline. She has a rather infantile attitude to life, but to commit a crime, and against whom? Against her best friend. Charlotte immediately rejected this version. After sitting for a while longer, Charlotte remembered the letter. She opened the inside pocket of her bag and took out an envelope. Carefully unsealing it, Charlotte took out a quadruple folded A4 sheet of paper and unfolded it. Just as Charlotte had expected, it was a letter from her grandmother, in very beautiful handwriting, in black ink. The following lines were written out. Dear Charlotte, if you're reading this letter, it's probably been over 6 months since I've been gone. I am writing this to you at a time when you are studying hard for your first university exams. You are going through a difficult period, searching for yourself, new challenges from life. That's why I didn't start this conversation right now, but decided to write a letter to the future. Maybe the day will come when I will be ready to tell you this story personally. But I realize that I am not getting younger every year, so just in case I will tell you everything in a letter, because death may precede the moment of my readiness to talk to you. When you were a child, you sometimes asked about your grandfather, and I usually avoided answering your questions. As you may remember, your grandfather, David Wilson, was a geologist looking for minerals. In Alaska, he and his group found some gold deposits. This place was a kilometer away from the gold mines known to our country at that time, and the group did not hurry to inform the local authorities about it, but decided to organize their own mining. I don't think it was a matter of personal desire of your grandfather and his colleagues to get rich. He told me that he just didn't trust the local authorities. They'd probably organize underground mines and send the geologists back to town as soon as possible. Unwilling to let that happen, the group set about mining on their own. I don't know if that was really the case anyway. I don't judge him, and you don't judge him. Remember, I've been telling you since you were a kid that you can't judge anyone in this life. Anyway, the place turned out to be fishy. They were catching up to 100 grams a day, and so it went on for almost a fortnight. One day they were spotted by workers from the official mines. His name was Alex Brown, and they had known Grandpa for several years. At first they were even friends. Alex Brown used to come round to our house sometimes, but then it was like a cat got between them. I guess your grandfather didn't like the fact that Brown was going to frame the plant manager to take his place. They've been enemies ever since. Of course, when Brown saw that Grandpa was doing illegal mining, he immediately wrote a denunciation on the whole group. It was the 1960s, the so-called thaw. People were coming out of prison, and with us the exact opposite happened. Your grandfather was sent to a camp for 5 years for stealing the country's property or something like that. We were lucky 10 years before that. The punishment for the same offense was much harsher. Your daddy was 2 years old at the time, and I raised him by myself until he was 5. For good behavior, Grandpa was released a couple of years early. I didn't know at the time that Grandpa's group didn't hand over all the gold to the police when they arrested him, but somehow Brown knew about it. As soon as he learned that Grandfather was free, he began to torment our family and the families of Grandfather's colleagues from the geological group. For some reason, he demanded that the gold be returned to him and kept threatening to turn Grandpa in. And one day, Grandfather and his comrades got fed up with Brown's behavior. I don't know what they did to him, but after that they put Brown in jail for 5 years. 2 years later, we got the news that he died in prison. From then on, we lived like a normal, ordinary family. My grandfather tried not to remember about the years spent in prison, and I did not remind him. 30 years passed, the government changed, and it was the time when everything was possible. We were excited about your birth and forgot about what happened 30 years ago. But soon Grandpa fell ill. He was still on his feet but realized he didn't have long to live. One day, when he and I were alone in the flat, your grandfather pulled back the cupboard, cut a piece of linoleum with a knife, and from under the floor wood, took out some paper bags. He opened them up and laid out many middle pieces of gold on the table. They were dirty, unformed lumps, as if they had just been pulled from a mountain stream. I realized that back then, in the 60s, he had never given the authorities the gold he had mined. That same day we took the jewelry to the smelter. We were not even asked where we got such wealth from. In the end, the gold was melted down to a kilogram bar. There was even a little bit left over. This remaining part helped us a lot in the 90s, so we never had any problems with how, for example, to get you ready for school. 6 months later, Grandpa died. I kept that bullion in the cupboard under layers of old bed linen. I even forgot about it for a while. But now I realize it's a bad idea to keep jewelry in my underwear, and I need to take it to the bank. I don't know if I'd dare tell you all this in my lifetime, probably not. Please forgive me for not being frank enough with you, but there are some things you shouldn't rush into. Now you know about not the easiest thing in our family's fate. I hope you react to it with understanding. Be careful with the gold. A flock of kites likes to swoop down on sudden riches. Take care of yourself. Love you and kisses always, your grandmother. With tears in her eyes, Charlotte finished the letter. Of course, she had no thought of offending either her grandfather or her grandmother. Charlotte walked over to the cupboard that had been against the wall all her life. With difficulty, but she managed to push it back a little. She squatted down and examined the linoleum. Right next to the skirting board, Charlotte saw these very grandfatherly cuts. She wanted to see what the hiding place under the floorboards looked like, but at that moment the intercom rang. Charlotte picked up the phone and heard Terry's familiar voice. Walking up to the flat, her friend immediately started questioning Charlotte. "So what's your problem?" "I've never driven so fast before. My friend scared me." "Follow me." Charlotte answered her quietly and went into the room. She put her friend on the sofa, silently took her bag, opened it, and took out a bar. "Look." "What's this?" Terry darted her eyes out and didn't take her gaze off the gold. A kilogram bar, pure gold. May I? Terry held out her hands for the bar. Charlotte handed it to her. Wow, did your grandmother give you this? Yes, Charlotte replied, and briefly recounted the contents of her grandmother's letter. Wow, mate, you're lucky. How much is it now in rubles? I don't know. I haven't looked yet. Such wealth, and she didn't even look. Terry was surprised and took out her phone. Let's see, it's $180,000, Charlotte. Yeah, by small town standards, that's a lot of money. That's 2 flats. Charlotte was surprised at the value of her inheritance. She thought the bullion would be worth less than $100,000, but here it was. So it was no wonder that someone was after her. Have you thought of where you're going to spend the money? Terry asked curiously. No, not yet, Charlotte replied. I didn't call you just because of the bullion. So what happened? When I came home with the bullion, someone tried to rob me. How'd you get away? No, passers-by scared the guy away. Then the police were here. I'm really scared. I see, someone was jealous of your sudden wealth. Did the police say anything? No, they said they'd look into it. Well, the usual, but I suspect one person. The banker who handled my inheritance. He's the only one who knew I had gold in my bag. That's right. Oh, I know that petty breed. I had one, a banker, let's say, who nearly robbed me of every last cent. Seriously, you never told me. It was a long time ago. So what did you tell the police about this scumbag? No, I was in shock at the time. I only remembered about the banker when I got home. Oh, you didn't tell me about the prime suspect. Okay, let's go to the police right now. You can tell me everything there. What now? Charlotte was surprised. Well, when will you be attacked a second time? Or when that banker is on holiday somewhere in the Canary Islands? Let's go, now. What if you think it needs to be done so urgently? Charlotte got up from the sofa and started to get ready, but soon stopped. Wait, Terry. Charlotte sat down and asked her friend to sit down. Listen, I didn't think at all. Maybe I shouldn't have dragged you into all this. You see, it's very dangerous. At any moment, they'll want to do it again. Attack me, break into my flat. I don't want you near me at that moment. Cause they could do the same to you. And I don't want to hear any more of that, Terry said sternly. If they come after the two of us, it'll mean only one thing: we'll fight back. So mate, don't worry about me. We've been through this before. And as for the flat, they probably know your address. The bank has all the details. Well, then what we'll do is, after the police station, we'll go to my place. You'll stay at my flat for the duration of the investigation. They don't know my address. Thank you very much. The friends hugged and walked downstairs to Terry's car. On the way, Charlotte thought about Terry and her courage. She hadn't even raised an eyebrow when she knew they could be in danger right now. Charlotte chastised herself for being suspicious of her friend. Even though she rejected them right away, it turns out that Terry is even more than a true friend. She is a fearless person. Charlotte was so impressed by her friend's words and decisive actions that she didn't even think about the strangeness of Terry's behavior. What if she's only acting so boldly because she's confident of her safety? It's not like her accomplices are going to attack her themselves, so she's playing the hero. But Charlotte did not care for these thoughts. She thought she should try again to dissuade Terry from helping her so insistently. At the very least, explain to her that staying with her wasn't the best or safest idea. Terry, are you sure I won't be in the way? Charlotte asked, hoping for some sort of personal reason for her friend. Charlotte, why are you laughing? You know that I have no one to bother you. I've been living alone for so long. Yeah, we could use a man right now, sure. Come on, we can manage without men, Charlotte replied to Terry's remark. She realized that there was no point in talking her friend out of it and decided not to resist any further. When they reached the police station, they went to the front desk. Hello, we'd like to make a statement. Terry began to speak loudly into the window of the duty officer. "Terry, maybe I'd better," Charlotte interrupted her friend, reminding her that she was the victim here. "Yeah, sure." Terry cooled down a bit. "All right, girls. Can you please decide what you want?" asked the officer on duty irritably. "Do you understand?" Charlotte began to explain quietly. "I was attacked today. They wanted to rob me." "Right." The officer on duty didn't listen to Charlotte. He took out a piece of paper from under the desk. "Write a statement." "No, you don't understand me." Charlotte continued calmly. "The police have already been called. I gave them a statement, and they took all the statements they needed." "Then what do you want?" "Wait for them to call you." The policeman replied, still irritated. "What's the matter with you? That when they kill you, then you come?" Terry jumped in. "Can you listen to the man? Or are you going to interrupt him every 10 seconds? "So, woman, who are you anyway?" The officer turned to Terry. "Do you want me to take you out?" "You don't need to take anyone out." Charlotte modestly stood up for her friend. "The point is that I remembered some new circumstances regarding the attack." "I see your point. Give me a name." "Wilson." "Wilson. Stand by." The desk officer turned to the computer and typed in Charlotte's name. Then he picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Comrade Major, the victim came in on your case today. She says new circumstances have come to light." "What? And even so, well, I'll send her to you." The officer on duty hung up the phone and turned to Charlotte. "So, in your opinion, the case has already found the right person. Go to the 7th office, they'll meet you there." "Found how?" Terry asked loudly. She was clearly more surprised than Charlotte. Terry wanted to go with her friend, but the duty officer stopped her. "Citizen, you wait here. Nobody let you in there." "What do you mean? Nobody let me in?" "I'm the victim's friend," her only support, Terry said, indignantly. "You're a stranger," replied the policeman sternly. "Terry, don't worry, I'll manage on my own," Charlotte reassured her friend and went straight down the corridor. The 7th office was not far from the gatehouse. When she reached the door, she stopped, and after a few seconds a man in civilian clothes came out of the office. "Are you Wilson?" he asked. "Yes," Charlotte replied. "I'm an investigator. Smith is my last name. I was handed the case of the attack on you. Anyway, we found your failed burglar on a hot lead." "And who was he?" "Recidivist, got out of prison 6 months ago for robbery, decided to pick up where he left off, didn't even change neighborhoods. He must have lost his touch while he was in prison, even forgot about the cameras. 2 hits in an hour, so we caught him quick. Now you're gonna have to make a positive ID." "Caught him so fast. What if he remembers me in the lineup?" "Look, he probably remembered you when he tried to steal the bag. However, for your peace of mind, we're going to take security precautions. You'll be looking at him through mirrored glass. He won't see you." "Good." Chuckles, "Then I'm calm," Charlotte replied. The investigator went back into the office and returned 30 seconds later. "Come in. Everything's ready." Charlotte, worried, walked into the office. Along the whole wall, there was indeed a window with a man sitting behind it. "Excuse me, is he going to sit here alone?" Charlotte whispered to the investigator. "I thought that identification is when you have to choose among several people." "This is a different identification," Smith hissed back at her. "Not only can't he see you, he can't hear you, so you can talk in your own voice." "Good." Charlotte looked at the man behind the glass. He looked like that man, but he didn't look like that man, you see. He was wearing a hat and a scarf, and the scarf was all over his face, and only his eyes were visible. "Okay, hold on a second." The investigator went to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a cellophane bag with his belongings. Then he went into the bright room where the alleged robber was sitting and handed him the things. He put on his hat and scarf, and the investigator returned to Charlotte. "Now, what do you think?" "Now it looks like it." Charlotte exclaimed. In front of her sat an exact replica of the robber. Very good. Go into the next office. Now we'll make all the necessary formalities. Charlotte went into the next room, and a minute later the investigator came in. Please tell me, have you questioned him yet? Charlotte asked. We have, but what are you interested in? Smith asked incredulously. I just wanted to know, did he say anything about the client? What client? Citizen Wilson. This man is a repeat offender. He spent his life snatching purses from girls. Nobody ordered you, don't worry. Really? Then why don't I just walk away? Sign here. The investigator handed Charlotte a piece of paper, and you can go. After signing, Charlotte left the investigator's office. No sooner had she got to the front desk than Terry pounced on her with questions. Did you find it? We found him, some kind of gangster. So he was acting on his own? Yeah, the banker, as it turned out, had nothing to do with it. The friends went outside and got into Terry's car. So where are we taking you? My place or yours? Terry asked, pulling out of the police car park. If it's going to end so well, let's go to my place. I think we both need a bit of a rest. I've had the wine for almost a year now. Different conversation, mate. Terry said cheerfully. Are you sure you don't want to come back to my place? You're not afraid? Why would I be scared if they found him? Then it was just a coincidence. And nobody ordered me. I get it. I get it. Terry said snidely. Are you worried about your gold? No, Charlotte laughed. I brought it with me. It's in my bag. How? Terry was loudly surprised. You've been carrying the bar around with you all this time? Of course, it didn't seem safe to leave it at home, especially in case the police needed it. I didn't know how quickly they'd solve things there. Maybe they'd take it as evidence. I'm amazed at you, Terry said with a change in mood. They tried to snatch your bag just a few hours ago, and you're carrying a bullion bar. You're just fearless, aren't you? What are you so worried about? I'm in the car with you. Nobody knows I've got gold in there. Well, you're lucky you're with me. Well, Charlotte, maybe you did the right thing, but next time, warn me that you have such a valuable cargo with you. They drove in silence to Charlotte's flat. Damn it, I forgot to switch off the light, Charlotte said frustratedly, looking out of the car at her windows. The meters must have counted. She's got a bar of gold in her bag and she's thinking about the communal flat? Terry laughed. They parked not far from the entrance and went up to the flat. The front door was slightly ajar. Did you forget to lock the door too? Terry asked in a whisper. I don't remember. It's crazy. Charlotte replied and slowly opened the door. She stepped carefully into the corridor and into the room. What on earth? I knew it. The whole room was trashed. All the cupboards and drawers were open and things from there were scattered all over the floor. It was the same mess in the kitchen and the other room. What happened here? Terry asked, also entering the room. There can't be any coincidence, Charlotte said excitedly. They were looking for gold. But it could be that Terry tried to find some other explanation for what had happened, but couldn't find any. Yes, you're right. It's hardly a coincidence. And now we'll make sure of it, Charlotte said in a shaky voice and went into the second room. There she went to the cabinet, all the drawers of which had been taken out. She took one of the drawers and pulled out a small box and an envelope from there. From the box, Charlotte pulled out earrings, and from the envelope several $100 notes. Look, these are all my rainy day supplies. I've had them here for about 5 years. Baby earrings that a relative gave me. They're not worth as much as gold, but they're not cheap. If they just wanted to make a profit out of this flat, they'd have taken them anyway. I'm not even talking about dollars. No, they were looking for gold bullion. My grandmother told me to be careful with it. Okay, we need to call the police. Charlotte sat down on the couch and looked at Terry. Look, really, this is getting out of hand. I'm asking you to go home. It's very dangerous with me right now. I'm telling you again, I'm not interested in hearing you worry about me, Terry replied firmly. Then Charlotte got up and went to the front door. She closed all the locks that were on it and even bent a wooden mop to the handle, thus making an improvised lock. Charlotte, was this lying here? Terry asked from the room. What are you talking about? Charlotte walked back into the living room and looked at her friend. Terry was standing by the desk. All the papers and typewriters that had been on it had been thrown to the floor. Only one small note remained on the desk. Charlotte walked over to the desk, picked up the piece of paper, and read what was written on it. If you value your life in the slightest, take the gold back to where you got it from. Charlotte put the note on the table and covered her face with her hands. Charlotte, what are you doing? Terry came up to her friend and put her arm round her. Now it's clear that it's the banker. Where you took it from is obviously a safe deposit box, so he got caught. He thought you'd get scared, bring the gold to the bank and he'd take it, but nothing. Now you'll tell the police, he'll be arrested and the adventure will be over. I hope so, Charlotte whispered back. A few minutes later, the intercom rang. The police had arrived. The task force consisted of 2 operatives and an expert. Hello, I'm Captain Morris. This is Lieutenant Commander White. Tell me, did you touch anything here before we got here? Yeah, a little, Charlotte replied. Well, you'll still have to give your fingerprints to our expert so we can distinguish them from those of the criminals. The captain began questioning Charlotte while the senior lieutenant talked to Terry. The lieutenant did his job faster and Terry sat on the couch with Charlotte. The captain continued to ask his questions. Do you suspect anyone? Has anyone threatened you? I've already been assaulted today and Investigator Smith was in charge of it. I thought there was some kind of liaison between officers on your force. Look, we can have several attacks like this in a day, and we're not digitized yet. The captain opened a folder and began to sort through the papers. Smith, you say? Yeah, got it. Morris pulled out some printouts and took a quick look at them. Right, well, it's a bit clearer now. Although, to be honest, it didn't. So you suspect someone, remember? Yes. I think the banker from the bank is behind this. The banker? You know, there's a lot of things I expected to hear, but not that. What could you possibly have done to stop the banker? Charlotte told the captain about her trip to the bank, her inheritance, showed him the gold bar, and held out the note she had left. Who else could it be but him? Charlotte summarized the story. Yes, it's very interesting. The captain examined the note from all sides. Did anyone else know about the gold? No, just me and my grandmother, who's been dead for 6 months. What about this girl here? Morris pointed to Terry. Terry? Oh, come on. She's my friend. And she found out about the gold after the attack. So what if she's a friend? The captain asked. You know, I've had more than my share of this in my practice. What close people have not attacked each other? Are you out of your mind? Terry jumped up. I told you I didn't even know he existed. You just want to blame some random person. I get it. You're just bought by this bank, all of you. Sit down, please, Morris told her in a stern voice, and keep your temper in check. No one is bought by anyone, and no one is accusing you, and it's my job to suspect everyone, including you. But let me tell you something, Charlotte interjected. It's true. It's nonsense. Terry was with me the whole evening. She came to my aid at the first call. I don't want you to even suspect her. I'm sorry to say that your wishes don't determine our job. Well, I guess we'll get back to Terry. The captain paced the room and turned to Charlotte. There's something I'm having trouble with. What's not working for you? Charlotte asked. From her tone, she no longer had the energy to express surprise or indignation. Her voice sounded irritated and tired. Look, why would your banker set himself up like that? Leave a note, you might say, with the exact address, the bank that is. So perhaps he counted on the fact that I, frightened and frantically running back to the bank to give the gold, without even running to the police. That's right. Terry supported her friend. Maybe they have it all automated there? You check it out. We will. Morris looked at Terry with disbelief. So it doesn't work. Let's say you got scared and took the gold back to the bank. Then the banker gets into your safe deposit box and takes the gold for himself. Well, let's assume that the whole bank is in collusion and they intend to take your gold, and none of the security officers or just colleagues will ask your banker what he is doing. But still, the day will come when you will go to the bank to take your gold, or just come out of shock the next day and run to complain to the police. Then a simple inquiry to the bank will reveal that there is no gold and the banker will be arrested. It's just one big, handmade setup. And if they have such a gangster scheme, why don't we have a single report in our department related to this banker and this bank branch in general? With that kind of approach to crime, they'd be as screwed up as they are on the first case. Don't you think that's a bit rubbish? Charlotte shrugged her shoulders helplessly and sighed. Is that why you suspect me? Terry, unlike her friend, continued to be active. I'm telling you, it's my job to suspect. All right, let's say you didn't know about the gold. Not supposing, but definitely, Charlotte whispered. I told Terry about the possible inheritance when I didn't know what was there. So you knew. Morris pointed his finger at Terry. You knew your friend had unexpected wealth. What difference does it make what's in there? Even if you didn't know about the gold, you knew that the box could hypothetically contain something expensive. And you told them to write the note to your forgeries to lead us on a wild goose chase to frame the banker. Isn't that right? Well, look, it's just something. Terry was furious. She couldn't get any coherent words out of her mouth. It's just a load of bollocks. Charlotte, who had a little more energy after she realized that the captain had taken her friend seriously, said instead, I distinctly remember what I told Terry at work today. I told her that there was some strange inheritance, but that it couldn't be anything rich, and that there must be some mistake. You'd have to agree that's hardly the sort of thing that would interest a criminal looking to make a fortune. Maybe. But then tell me, Terry, where were you when the flat was burgled? Well, I've already told your colleague everything. I was at the police station waiting for Charlotte. So you weren't near Charlotte, and you were technically able to make calls and send messages? Yes, Terry shrieked. I was running a gang of robbers from the police station and telling them which flat to rob over the phone. Are you a normal person? Tell me, please. You've got the story on a plate. Here's the banker. Here's the motive. Here's everything. But no, you keep on doing nonsense and accusing innocent people. Terry took her phone out of her pocket and tossed it towards the policeman. Here, you can read my correspondence, order call details, anything you want. We can do that. Morris said a little apprehensively. He was impressed by Terry's speech. All right, I see. Let's get back to the banker. Suppose the hilarious thing at all, it was his first case. An inexperienced crook, so to speak, with a job in a bank at a not too young age, decides to take up theft. All right, we'll accept that too. Morris again took the note left on Charlotte's desk, but there is another circumstance which again breaks your version. What do you think is the purpose of this criminal group led by the wily banker? What is it? Terry was outraged. To prey on lonely people. Well, is it only gold? What do you mean? Charlotte asked. If they wanted to rob you, why didn't they take the dollars and earrings? It's not that much, but it's something. So they didn't organize the whole thing for nothing and risk their freedom. Maybe they don't work for change, Charlotte whispered. But mentally she knew that the money and jewelry left in the flat really shattered all her and Terry's assumptions, and they couldn't have failed to see Charlotte's stash. Then cross out the versions with me too, Terry said loudly. My accomplices would have needed that money too. Yes, the captain scratched the back of his head. You didn't know that there was gold in the box. So if your goal was just jewelry, you would have taken what's in here. Really, Terry asked sarcastically, are you sure about that? Shouldn't I be searched and detained for 48 hours just in case? I could run away. But why are you making fun of me? I told you, it's my job. Look, these ill-fated notes have ruined our whole case. We're gonna have to start over. Charlotte, can you think again, please? Who else could theoretically know that you had the gold? I don't know. No one but this banker knew I had the gold. But why didn't his accomplices take the other jewelry? I have no idea. Well, we'll go to the bank tomorrow and question him anyway. Morris looked at his watch. Look, it's after 1 o'clock in the morning and we haven't made any progress. Well, thank you for your help with the investigation. If anything changes, you'll get a call right away. Please don't leave town and stay in touch. Morris shifted his gaze to Terry. You too. The captain signaled to the expert and the lieutenant to wind down. Charlotte stood up to escort the operatives out, but immediately stopped. Wait, Brown, I got it. I'm sorry. Are you all right? The captain was surprised by Charlotte's sudden realization. Can I get you some water? I realized why they didn't care about the rest of the jewels. They were tasked with finding the gold bar, and it was banker Christopher Brown who did it. Look, you and I have spent so much time sitting here talking, reasoning, making logic, making cause and effect connections, and now you're at it again. But no, it doesn't make common sense. Morris persuaded Charlotte, but she wouldn't listen to him. She was looking through the scattered things for her grandmother's letter, which was in the gold box in the bank. Is that what you're looking for now? Where is it? Charlotte couldn't find the cardboard envelope. I need a letter. Citizen, isn't that it? An expert came out of the next room with Grandma's letter in his hands. Yes? Charlotte exclaimed, taking the envelope from the employee. Thank you, and how it got there, I don't understand. Now, wait a second. Charlotte took the letter out of the envelope and looked for her great-grandfather's lines for imprisonment. Well, yes, of course, here it is. Look, Comrade Captain. What have you got there? Morris approached Charlotte. One day they were spotted by a laborer from the official mines. His name was Alex Brown. The banker is a descendant, a grandson, probably, of a man who had a conflict with my grandfather over gold. The captain took the letter and read the lines himself, thought for half a minute, and said, Very interesting version, cinematic. But how can you be so sure that the banker is a descendant of the same Brown? You don't even know what your grandfather's friend or enemy looked like. Sure, it's a small town, and Brown's not the most common name, but it's just a theory. It's not just a theory. Charlotte persuaded the captain. It would be nothing more than an interesting conjecture, were it not for all the other circumstances. You lacked motive to finally select the banker as the prime suspect, and now you have it. All the offenses were committed in such a slapdash manner because it really was his first case. Well, the type, because how could he hire anyone? That's for you to find out. But the important thing is we now have an answer to the question of motive. You're right, I don't disagree. But we still don't have enough to arrest him immediately. We need to investigate the bank itself. If we go after your banker now, we may not have enough evidence. What's more, if the court refuses to arrest him because of this, he may flee with his accomplices. So tomorrow morning we'll go to the bank with a group, shake things up, interrogate, lift documentation, and only then we'll bring charges against the banker. And if he refuses, he'll say I don't know any Browns, just namesakes. Maybe we can figure out a way to catch him in the act. Terry suggested it. You got something concrete in mind? How about you stick a chip on a bar of gold, or give Charlotte a fake bar with a chip already embedded in it. She'll deposit it in a safe deposit box, and when the banker decides to steal it, you'll know about it. Oh, where are you all going? Morris sighed heavily. Where am I going to get you a fake bullion with a chip overnight? And if you stick something on the real one, a banker who has seen such ingots more than once in his life will immediately find the extra parts on it. We can't do that. We'll figure it out without the chips on the spot. He's got accomplices, and it's possible they're bank employees, so it's important for us to grab their whole office with a sudden effect. Then what do we do? Charlotte asked. We go with a clear conscience tomorrow morning to another bank, deposit the gold there, It's the safest thing to do. He wouldn't dare to clean out a whole bank for a bar. And you? Charlotte wondered. What about us? We'll work with your banker, I explained, but you'll just leave us here overnight. What if he wants to try again and break in again? Oh, the captain sighed heavily again. Okay, comrade senior lieutenant, has the service car not left yet? No, it has. The bored policeman answered the captain. Then you stay in it for the night, together with our driver. Stand outside the entrance and keep an eye on anyone who comes in here, and the expert and I will drive my car then. It was evident from the senior lieutenant's face that it was not in his plans to stay the night near the victim's entrance, but he would not disobey the order. The captain took a small card out of his pocket and handed it to Charlotte. Here's my card. If you need anything, call me. The lieutenant will leave his phone number for you too. Charlotte thanked the captain, and the task force finally left the flat. Well, I'm gonna go too, so I won't keep you. Terry started packing. You're crazy. What if they track you down? No, stay here. It's safer under guard. Charlotte wouldn't let her friend go home. Well, I'll feel safer with you. All right, I'll stay here. Terry went to the window to think that just a few hours ago, I didn't realize I'd be guarded by the police. What an adventure. Tell me about it. Charlotte also went to the window and looked down. A police car with its lights on was parked outside. They wouldn't believe you if you told anyone. But I still can't understand it. Terry moved away from the window and sat down on the sofa. Why couldn't you have gone straight to the banker's house and arrested him? There's motive, there's evidence. Maybe they were just too lazy to look for him. Maybe he doesn't live at his registered address. What then? We need to make an inquiry to the bank and talk to colleagues. And it's not easy to do that at night. So they're hoping to take him straight to the bank. I still don't like it. And if it's not his shift tomorrow, then what? I don't know. I don't want to get into this whole investigative thing. I just want it to be over soon. So do I, Terry said, and the friends were silent for a while. They stared at the wall and listened to the ticking of the grandmother's clock, each thinking about her own thoughts. At one point, Terry asked, "Now have you thought of what you're going to do with the gold when it's all over?" "Why do you ask me that twice?" Charlotte grinned. "No, let everything be over first, and then I'll think about it. To be honest, I'm less and less happy about this wealth. I'll have to get rid of it sooner rather than later." "Yes, it doesn't bring you happiness, but that's for now. So don't be discouraged. We'll solve everything." The friends began to get ready for bed. Charlotte made Terry's bed in the other room, and she wanted to lie down on the sofa in the living room. Having already switched off the lights, Terry said, "Look, thank you." "For what?" Charlotte didn't understand her friend. "Well, when that captain started to suspect me, you didn't even listen to him. You stood up for me. It took me a split second to realize you'd believe him. I had no choice to suspect my mate of robbery. He's a cop. He's so confident in his theories. I'd have believed I'd organized the whole thing." The night passed without any adventures. Either the criminals were afraid of the police car near the entrance, or they were not going to do anything else today. In any case, the friends managed to get a good night's sleep after a hard day. The next morning, they decided to go to another bank to deposit the gold. Charlotte thought for a long time, but did not dare to call the captain to ask how things were going with the capture of the banker. She didn't want to distract the policeman from his business. Terry went straight to the window. "Charlotte, they've gone," she said excitedly. "Maybe they've caught them all and we're out of danger," Charlotte suggested timidly, glancing at the empty parking space by the driveway. "Well, let's get the bullion sorted out quickly, and then we'll call Morris." The friends packed up and walked down to the car. Terry drove very carefully, as if she was driving for the first time and was afraid of hitting someone. "Can't you see there's no tail?" she asked Charlotte worriedly. "No, it's all right. Go on," Charlotte replied calmly, looking carefully through all the windows. But no sooner had the car left the courtyards and entered the main street than it was struck in the side by an old car. Two young men got out of it, approached Terry's car, and started pounding with their hands, demanding to open the door. "Stay where you are," Terry said loudly, checking that the car doors were locked. I'm sitting." Charlotte pulled out her phone and began frantically dialing the captain's phone number. At that moment, one police car and one civilian car pulled up to the scene of the accident. The post operatives who came out of there quickly rounded up the two assailants and placed them in the police car. One of the operatives was Captain Morris, who approached Terry's car. Terry didn't immediately realize that she had to open the door, but she let the policeman into the back seat. "Girls, I apologize for putting you through this, but there was no quicker or more efficient way to catch the accomplices red-handed." "So you mean to say that you sent us on purpose to give the gold to another bank?" Charlotte asked after a bit of shock. "I tell you, it was the quickest and most efficient way. We didn't have ironclad proof. We didn't. All those marvelous stories about grandfathers and the wily bankers sounded convincing, but not to the court. Now we've got it all ironclad. I reckon we'll give them a bit of a hard time and they'll give up their banker. Don't worry about the car, we'll sort it out. The main thing is that you're alive and well and all the criminals are caught, well, almost all of them." "What do you mean? The banker hasn't been caught yet?" Terry was surprised. "In the next few hours, I think he'll be caught. So let's get in my car. I'll take you to your bank. The car will be examined by experts, then taken to the service car park. So I'll be your taxi driver today." Morris drove Charlotte and Terry to another bank, where Charlotte successfully deposited the bullion in a safe deposit box. The friends still hadn't recovered from the emergency shock, and so couldn't realize the extent of the danger the captain had put them in. Probably, if they had realized it, they would have communicated with Morris differently. On the way out of the bank, the cop's phone rang. "Hello, I'm listening." "Oh yeah? That's great. We'll be right there." "Well, you'll never guess the names of today's attackers." "Was it Brown?" Charlotte asked in surprise. "Exactly, it's a family gang. The attackers are your banker's brother and nephew, who just ratted him out. We have information that Christopher Brown is on shift today. So I suggest we go right now to apprehend him." 10 minutes later, the captain's car with Charlotte and Terry was already outside the bank where Christopher Brown worked. Another police car was already parked in front of it, and the officers, along with the senior lieutenant, were waiting for a command from the captain. "You two," Morris looked at the officers, "go to the service entrance of the bank. The lieutenant and I will go in the front." The captain shifted, looking at Charlotte. "Would you like to come with us?" "Yes," Charlotte answered unexpectedly firmly. She wanted to look into the eyes of the criminal who had arranged such an adventure for her. Morris, the senior lieutenant, and Charlotte walked leisurely into the bank. The captain silently showed his ID to the bank employee standing at the entrance and made his way into the hall. At the farthest window sat Brown. He saw the operatives at first, but did not pay attention to them, probably because they were in civilian clothes. But when Charlotte came into his field of vision, Brown jumped up, looked round, and rushed towards the office. "How quick!" Morris grinned and headed for the office. It opened with a special card, so he asked the bank employee sitting at the next window to let them through. The captain took his time. He realized that his colleagues had probably already grabbed Brown on the way out. When the female employee opened the door, it turned out that this was indeed the case. In the bank's small employee lounge, Brown was sitting, with two security guards standing beside him. Apparently, the banker did not resist the arrest. "Why are you running, Mr. Brown? We wanted to talk to you, and you're running." The captain sat down in the chair opposite Brown. "I'm not telling you anything." "I want a lawyer," Brown hissed back. "You'll have a lawyer," Morris assured him, "but your relatives have already testified. Yesterday's call detail from your phone won't work in your favor either. In fact, we know all about motive." "So what's going on here?" A stately man in his 60s entered the office. "Operational activities," answered the captain. "And who are you actually?" "The bank manager," replied the man in a bass voice. "You are just in time, Mr. Manager. Your employee is suspected of organizing a theft and an attempt on a man's life." "What attempt on his life?" Brown was surprised. "What kind? And when a car deliberately crashes into another car, is that not an attempt?" the captain asked him. "What have they done?" The banker covered his face with his hands. "Or maybe your relatives made it up. And you had nothing to do with it?" "No," whispered Brown. "It was all my idea?" "Yes, you see how marvelous. You're not even denying anything," Morris summarized. "Christopher, how could you? You've been one of the best employees in the business for so many years, not a single suspicion or reprimand. And now you've decided to take advantage of a client. I'll have your dismissal made retrospectively. I don't want our bank's name in any criminal reports." If it's any consolation, the captain said to the manager, Brown wasn't acting out of self-interest. He didn't want to profit from his customers. He was motivated by personal motives. But of course, to arrange such a thing because of some dispute from the past, yes, it does not justify him in any way. Comrade Senior Lieutenant asked the bank manager a few questions. The lieutenant left to talk to the manager. Only the captain, Charlotte, and the banker remained in the room. The sentries stood near the entrance. It was not just a dispute from the past, the banker began to say. It was a matter of honor, family honor. He looked at Charlotte intently. "Your grandfather framed my grandfather and took away what was rightfully our family's." "What are you talking about?" "I know the story. My grandfather didn't set anyone up. Your grandfather ratted on him, which is why my grandfather went to jail." "Of course, who would tell you the truth?" "Listen to me. Your grandfather simply took the gold that my grandfather made. At first, mine managed to establish some justice and helped your grandfather to go to prison, but he did not return the gold. So when my grandfather came back to ask for his gold after he was released, your grandfather set him up, faked an attack on himself, wrote something to the police, and that was it. By that time, my grandfather worked almost all the time at distant mines and mine sites, and his health was badly shaken. Of course, he couldn't stand the prison term and died. And then I saw your surname, saw the gold, clarified the personal data of your grandmother, and everything became clear to me at once. I called my brother, and we hatched a plan to get the gold from your flat. I gave him and my nephew the address. They drove there and waited for you. You won't believe this, but they witnessed the attack on you. So the two men who approached me during the attack were your relatives?" Charlotte wondered. "Apparently, yes, that's what they told me. Then my brother and nephews waited for you to leave home and started looking for gold. They didn't find it. We realized that the day after it happened, you would definitely go to another bank to deposit the gold. So we decided to go as radical as possible. They weren't supposed to hit you. I'm sure it was an accident. The plan was simply to stop the car and ask for the gold. Asking well thought out, I'll give you that. We didn't want to put your life in danger, but your family's honor." "Uniforms," the captain shouted. "Take this one down to the station." The cops led Brown away, and the captain and Charlotte walked out the service entrance and stopped. "Wait, I don't understand. Who was the first attacker who tried to take my purse from my doorstep?" "Just a robber," Morris answered. "Coincidence? It would have been a surprise if he'd been able to snatch your purse and seen the gold in it." "Yeah, so the people who rescued me were going to rip me off." Charlotte sighed heavily, "And there's more to the story. Why should I believe him over my grandmother?" "You don't have to believe anything." The captain reassured Charlotte, "Both versions have a right to exist." "But if Brown sincerely believed that my grandfather framed his grandfather, then his reaction is understandable. There are plenty of mitigating circumstances in this case: personal motive, recklessness, and the fact that he saved you from the first robber. But still, they committed a crime, and they'll get the punishment they deserve. I don't think they'll be in jail for very long, but a couple of years for sure. Well, we'll see what the court decides." "All right, Terry, I think we're expected back there." It's been a while since then. The court took into account all mitigating circumstances and sentenced the banker and his brother and nephew to 1.5 years in a penal colony. After the trial, Charlotte decided to go to the bank again, only to the bank where she had deposited the gold. After leaving the bank, Charlotte called Terry and offered to meet her at her house. An hour later, the friends were sitting on the sofa in the living room, drinking tea. "Well, I reread Grandma's letter and thought it over. Indeed, it was dangerous to own gold, so I decided to get rid of it." What? Terry was surprised. "You sold the bullion?" "Yes." Charlotte stood up, went to her bag and pulled out a puffy envelope. "This is for you." For me, Terry took the envelope in her hands and pulled out a wad of notes. You. Let's just say it's for car repairs. But the insurance pretty much covered it. So it's just for moral damages. You've suffered so much because of me. I can't imagine how you felt when you suffered so much because of my problems. Come on, mate, it's an adventure. My life is home, work, home, work, home, work, home, work, and this is some variety. You feel needed, don't you? I haven't felt as much emotion in the last 5 years as I did that day. So how could I refuse to help you? You couldn't. I didn't even think you could say no at the time. So I'm asking you to take this envelope. Consider it another personal favor. Ah, thank you. Terry carefully put the envelope into her bag, and the rest of it, have you finally thought of where to spend it? She asked and laughed. Yes, this time, yes, Charlotte replied, smiling. You've been thinking for a long time, so where to go? Really into property. I've heard that the market is down now and you have to act fast. No, not property, Charlotte said calmly. But in shares, well, you're kidding. I don't know anything about them, but you've always been a smart girl. And not in stocks. Then where? You see, this money, this gold has really very controversial origin. Of course, I believe every word of my grandmother, but some of the information she may not know. That's why I didn't dare to spend the money just to enrich myself. There is a fund called Singing Hearts. It helps sick children. It seemed right to me to send the rest of the money there. I live alone, I have a salary and a flat. And they need the money badly. I think this will be the best final chord in the half-century-long dispute between the two families.